Hello, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? I'm sorry that we have more people than the seats because there are some, last-minute registrations. But we are organizing the seats in an overflow very soon to a silent mode, just to avoid interrupting the event. Please put on your SI headset if needed and tune in to the channel of your language. Thank you. 我们今天现场中文、普通话及普语同需频道，谢谢。Our guests will arrive soon. Please be seated, and they will. Gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the IFF Hong Kong Conference cum inauguration ceremony of the IFF Hong Kong Center. This event is organized by the International Financial Forum, hosted by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and the IFF is an international non-profit and business of leaders from leading advanced and emerging market economies, as well as major international organizations such as the UN. The IFF is a long-standing high-level platform for dialogue and a research network in the field of international finance and sustainable development. It has also been regarded as playing a key role in Finance 20. Let's watch an introductory video on the International Finance Forum.
为有一定影响力的国际智库。国际金融论坛的创建和发展得到了200多位全球财经政要领袖的参与和支持，并且和50多个国家和地区、50多个国际和地区组织建立了合作的伙伴关系。
借助国际金融论坛这个平台，广交朋友、广泛交流，深入探讨全球面临的挑战与机遇，共同寻求。
It is encouraged to see these start
共同探讨世界大湾区的建设，为区域发展提取新动力，促成新增长，打造新格局。
国际金融论坛积极地响应国家战略，落户大湾区，建设具有标志意义的国际金融论坛勇者会址，成为粤港澳大湾区国际交往的一个合作平台，共建粤港澳大湾区国际金融枢纽平台。
China and all the friends present here, we must join forces to build a fair, balanced, sustainable and stable world.
I particularly refer to mainland China, will lead the world in the future of science, technological development, manufacturing and sales of products.
We must all call upon all countries to rectify the present trajectory of dismissal of the multilateral system.
The presence here today of some of the world's most eminent policymakers and prominent thinkers is a testament to the importance of this annual meeting.
It is quite critical that a sophisticated forum such as this plays a role in direct financial diplomacy.
It's a very important international institution, an independent think tank based here in China.
We need to really connect One Belt, One Road and the initiative has been taken by China with the International Finance Forum, the IFF.
New capital, new values, new work. And I have to say that never such a dedication to the new global economy and global finance has been so appropriate.
As an international financial forum coming up with leading ideas that will help stabilize and revitalize the financial infrastructure worldwide.
To fulfill those heavy duties and responsibilities.
China has indeed shown the world that rapid economic growth and modernization is possible.
IFF is such an important international forum to which I'm deeply attached. Never have global governance and international cooperation been so important as they are today. The world has no choice but to work as one if we have to overcome the immense challenges that confront us.
If we need an F
Affected by our global perspective and
community to investigate the new globalization era.
I firmly believe that ministers of finance, the G20, and especially all of you, the newly designated F20, in fighting this and future pandemics.
Mr. John K.C. Lee, Chief Executive of the Hong Kong SAR of the People's Republic of China, has conveyed his apologies for not being able to attend today's event. Nevertheless, Mr. Lee sends his congratulations and best wishes to the
Mr. Eddie Yu, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to have this opportunity to welcome such an impressive lineup of distinguished speakers and guests, including not just one, but several former heads of government, senior government officials, heavyweight business leaders, and renowned scholars. I'm grateful to the International Finance Forum for choosing Hong Kong in hosting this high-level global conference, and more significantly, in launching its Hong Kong Center on the forum's 20th anniversary. As a premier international financial center and an irreplaceable connection between the mainland and the rest of the world, Hong Kong is the ideal base to further the IFF's mission to promote international dialogue and multilateral cooperation in the financial realm. The work that the IFF is doing is more important than ever as the global enthusiasm for strategic competition intensifies. In the face of increasingly complicated challenges, the world needs more communication and collaboration. Under the unique one country, two systems principle, Hong Kong is bestowed with the unparalleled advantage of having strong national support while being connected to the rest of the world. In his important speech at the first session of the 14th National People's Congress in March, President Xi Jinping said the practicable status as the only place in the world where the global advantage and the China advantage converge in a single city is here to stay. As a dynamic and highly competitive global financial center, Hong Kong remains a strong supporter of multilateralism and global economic cooperation. We don't just talk the talk, we also walk the walk. The Hong Kong SAR government has been proactively reaching out to our international partners on various fronts. Over the last few months, my colleagues and I have led by example by traveling to the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Europe to strengthen ties and seek partnership opportunities. Just over a month ago, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority hosted on banking supervision's first physical meeting outside of Basel since the pandemic, underlying our contribution to maintaining global financial stability. Meanwhile, Hong Kong is Economic Partnership, or RCEP, a free trade agreement in the Asia-Pacific region. It is now the world's largest free trade agreement, and Hong Kong is committed to promoting regional economic integration through RCEP. In the era of strategic competition, we must be proactive, be the first mover, and be prepared for the evolving macro environment. Under the result-oriented approach that I have adopted, the Hong Kong SAR government is sparing no efforts to pursue high-quality development. we have been developing new engines for growth, including proactively attracting industries of innovation, technology, arts, and culture. We will also continue to integrate into the national development, particularly the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area development, and deepen economies under our country's Belt and Road Initiative and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, as one of the world's most open economies, multilateralism and globalization form part of Hong Kong's DNA. In the era of strategic competition, the Pearl of the Orient will shine even brighter because, after all, Hong Kong's success is based on our versatility and resilience. On that note, I wish this conference a great success and wish you all the best of business. Thank you.
We thank Mr. Lee for his kind words and support for the conference. May I now invite Dr. Han Xiangshu, IFF co-chairman, chair of the Council of Presidents of the UN General Assembly, and former Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea, to come onto the stage to deliver his opening remarks. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Han.
Mr. Chan Mo-po, Financial Secretary, members of the International Finance, to open the International Finance regular activities, but with much of our daily lives during the pandemic. Over 680 million people were infected globally, and over 6.8 million people lost their lives due to this unprecedented pandemic. It will take a long time for us to completely recover from this tragedy, but at the same time, we have learned many valuable lessons from this pandemic. We must reflect on mistakes made in responding to COVID-19 pandemic so that they are never repeated. It is the first time that the International Finance Forum is hosting its international conference in Hong Kong. Since it was founded in 2003, International Finance Forum continues to hold all of its conference meetings in mainland China. I am sure that today's conference, therefore, will herald a new chapter in the history of IFF to start a closer relationship with Hong Kong, the regional center of global financial institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, multilateralism and globalization have been the backbone of the peace and prosperity during the post-war period. The United Nations and the World Trade Organization have played important roles in promoting peace, development, human rights, and free trade in the globalizing world. However, we are today at a very critical juncture in human history, experiencing a rapidly weakening trend of multilateralization and globalization. The United Nations are divided over Ukraine, and the World Trade Organization has lost functioning properly for several years by now. Since the global financial crisis of 2008, the speed of multilateralism has begun to slow down, resulting in the coining even of a new word, globalization, by the Economist of London in 2019. If we are too slow in our response, stabilization may give way even to deglobalization. Unfortunately, we are meeting at a time when the global economy is forecast a slower growth, with the growth momentum being lost. There is a similarity in economic crisis between now and the global financial crisis of 2008. At the time, the world leaders facing the unprecedented crisis due to the collapse of Lehman Brothers were united collectively to deal with the global financial crisis. The shining outcome of the cooperation was the creation of Group of 20. Since then, the leaders of G20 have been meeting every year to cooperate on various global issues. However, unfortunately, it is different this time from that time. The international divide between major powers and the war in Ukraine has divided the world into two diametrically and strategically opposed camps where the reconciliation does not seem to be an easy task. Ladies and gentlemen, another major difference between then and now is the rapid development of internet and digital technology. Now, such areas as big data, blockchain, AI, robotics, IoT, 3D printing, and even biotech are rapidly changing human society as well as the world economy. The critical appearance of ChatGPT a few months ago is bound to accelerate this process further. The first and second industrial revolution of the 18th and 19th century were the causes that divided countries into advanced and underdeveloped countries at the time. China was on technological innovation that were we to promote the harmonious development of the world and eventually of the global peace, we would have to do our best to spread the benefit of the third and fourth industrial revolution more effectively and evenly among nations. This means that narrowing digital divide among nations as well as people is very crucial for the future of the prosperous world. When I served as president of the 56th session of the United Nations General Assembly during 2001 and 2002, I took the narrowing the digital gap between the nations as one of the major tasks during my presidency. I even hosted a two-day UN plenary session on digital divide, and that was 22 years ago. However, this gap is not easily disappearing. The internet users account for 23% of the world, 14%, and the least countries were still only 27%. The sophistication of digital technology has immense global strategical implications. Therefore, the fact that China and the United States, two most digitally advanced countries in the world, are now in deep strategic competition is no coincidence. Ladies and gentlemen, Hong Kong has played its role as the main regional center for global financial institutions for many years. The Great Bay Area is to emerge as the future financial and digital hub of the region in due course. As two critical issues facing humanity today are climate change and digitalization, Hong Kong and the Great Bay Area have much to do in order to help ameliorate the problems that may arise from these two issues. It implies that green financing and digitalization of finance would have to become the main policy concern for Hong Kong now and for multilateralism and globalization, as well as the roles and adaptation of Asia, Hong Kong, and the Great Bay Area in this rapidly transforming geopolitical and digital world environment. I wish all of you all the best for your active participation. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Dr. Han, for your insightful remarks. May I now invite Mr. Paul Chen, Financial Secretary of the Government of the Hong Kong SAR of the People's Republic of China, to come on the stage to deliver his remarks. Let's welcome Mr. Chen.
Your Excellency Dr. Han Sang-soo, Your Excellency Ms. Russell, Your Excellency Dame Shipley, distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to Hong Kong. We are honored to have you joining us for today's high-level conference, organized by the International Finance Forum, hosted by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority and supported by the Hong Kong Academy of Finance. I'm pleased to note that the formal opening of the IFF Hong Kong Center will take place in just a few minutes. It will be only the second IFF Center outside the mainland. following the recent opening of a representative office in Washington, D.C. The IFF, established back in 2003 by more than 20 countries, regions, and international organizations, is a high-level platform for dialogue and multilateral cooperation in the field of global finance. Today's theme, multilateralism and globalization in an era of strategic competition and implications for Asia, underlines that important commitment. So too does the launching of the IFF Hong Kong Center, which will take responsibility for the international affairs on behalf of IFF. It is true that the international economy is beset with unprecedented risks and uncertainties. Global growth is expected to slow down this year with substantial risks of hard landing. High interest rates continue to weigh on business activities. Inflation, while easing, remains stubbornly high. The effect of recent banking crisis in the US and Europe, with lingering impact, has heightened the concerns surrounding an already complicated economic environment. Given the fragile state of the global economy, it is critical that we work together. And yet, some policymakers have turned to protectionism, putting in place barriers to trade, capital flow, investment, and technology transfers. They seem to view that the international order is one that is based on zero-game competition. Such narrow-minded thinking is profoundly reshaping global economic activities, shifting trade and supply chains that tie to geopolitical blocks. Such notions as onshoring, friendshoring, or nearshoring are dominating discussions among the international business community and academia. Financial flows, foreign direct investments, and supply chain may become more fragmented as a result. That could well mean the hindering of cross-border capital flows, a reduction in international financing options and risk sharing. Individual countries may lose diversity in funding sources, leading to higher financing costs and more fragmented liquidity. No one will benefit in such a global economic environment. So you may ask, what is the perspective of Hong Kong on the prevailing global trend? What are we going to do in face of such a challenging global environment? Our answer lies with what our nation, China, has reiterated in the recent high-level meetings in Beijing. As President Xi said, and if I may quote, we must strive to promote the building of a community with a shared future for mankind. Deeply engraved in the spirit of a shared future are peace, development, cooperation, and mutual benefit. Indeed, at a time when the world is undergoing rapid changes unseen in a century, the world needs more inclusive and resilient development from which people can benefit. That is why our country is committed to high-level two-way opening up and practice true multilateralism. The Belt and Road Initiative is a clear and compelling illustration of multilateralism in action. Launched by President Xi 10 years ago. The Belt and Road Initiative upholds the principles of extensive consultation, collaboration, and shared benefits. It has made substantial contribution to participating countries and economies. The China-Euro Express Railway, for example, has provided an alternative land route between the continents of Asia and Europe, unleashing the economic potential of Eurasia and Central Asia. And in Indonesia, track laying of the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway was recently completed. This landmark project, I'm pleased to report, is scheduled for full operation this year. Our country remains committed to this visionary international collaboration initiative. Last year, China's Belt and Road non-financial outbound direct investment reached $21 billion, up by 3.3%, despite an extremely challenging economic environment. And the annual trade volume between China and Belt and Road countries has doubled from around $1 trillion in 2013 to more than $2 trillion in 2022. That is an average growth rate of about 9%. Thanks to the one country, two systems principle, Hong Kong is in a unique position with unparalleled advantages to connect the mainland and the rest of the world. Hong Kong is firmly committed to free trade organization. Hong Kong is a staunch supporter of the rule-based multilateral trading system with WTO at its core. In this regard, we are keen to see the WTO restore a well-functioning dispute settlement system accessible to all members. As the world progresses towards carbon neutrality and set priorities for ESG, there is much estimates have we rank #1 in Asia. Marks an experimenting new Asian government to issue 30-year and 20-year green bonds denominated in US dollar and euro respectively. We also issued the first ever government tokenized green by the bond market. Our sister cities in the Greater Bay Area are also home to a burgeoning cluster of green tech companies. Their work ranges from environmental engineering and carbon sequestration to energy reduction. Many of them, in fact, are already finding international markets for their offerings. We envisage that Hong Kong and the GBA together will host a complete, vibrant green industry and financing chain, serving the needs of the region and the world. Ladies and gentlemen, government to government, the IFF was exactly created to promote the strategic dialogue and candid communication the world needs. It was established to stimulate research and innovation, think tank building, and talent training that are so essential to global finance and its long-term process. Hong Kong is pleased to be able to play a role in this meaningful undertaking, honored to be part of the IFF and its inclusive global mission. We look forward to working closely with IFF to advance comprehensive and sustainable economic development for all. And for our guests traveling from afar, please do spend extra days in Hong Kong. Visit our cultural infrastructures, the Paris Museum, the Contemporary Arts Museum in West Kowloon. And also don't forget, take some time to try some of the 200 Michelin restaurants in Hong Kong. Last but not least, may I wish you a very successful forum and the best of health and business. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your very welcoming opening remarks. We are now going to have the inauguration ceremony of the IFF Hong Kong Center very soon. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the IFF. And the IFF is launching its Hong Kong Center at this special moment to further strengthen the global network in promoting green growth and sustainable development, as well as enhancing comprehensive multilateral cooperation in the digital economy and technology innovation. The IFF Hong Kong Center will play its full role of building a new international communication platform for mainland China and Hong Kong. Let us now witness the unveiling of the plaque of the IFF Hong Kong Center. May I invite the officiating guests to come on stage. They are Dame Janie Shipley, IFF of New Zealand; Mr. Eddie Yu, Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority; Mr. Lin Jianhai, Vice President and Director of IFF Global Center; please stay on stage for some photos. Thank you. Please be seated. To foster the financial hub on stage for the Lai Ji Hong, Mr. Anthony Leung, Mr. Chiu Yi, Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the first session of get all the things ready first. May I now invite the moderator, Dr. Siddharth Tiwari, IFF Vice President, former Chief Representative for Asia and Pacific of the BIS, and other speakers onto the stage. They are Dr. Han Sen-Su, Madame Dilma Rousseff,
There is a lot.
Go there. Yeah.
Thank you, Casey. Before I came here, that if ever there's a panel of Korea, you've held several important assignments both in Korea and United Nations. You were a UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on many issues, President of the 56th session of the General Assembly. You accepted the Nobel Peace Prize for the United Nations. President Rousseff, you've been the 36th President of Brazil, an illustrious career with a leader for the Global South. 36 has a ring here, with Dame Shipley being the 36th Prime Minister of New Zealand, the first woman to get that position, and with several key assignments and a deep interest, I should say, in China over the years. To my left, Harold James, preeminent historian of at least my generation, with a focus on international architecture and globalization, and may I say the current official historian of the IMF. And right at the end, Anthony Leung, who's known well in Hong Kong, former financial secretary, group chairman and CEO of the finance. There are two sessions today. The first one is Multilateralism and Globalization in an Era of Strategic Competition. And ask ourselves that over the last 4 decades, the world experienced a period of massive growth fueled by the expansion of globalization in goods, in services, information flows, and people-to-people exchanges over time. And it's not the case that there wasn't any serious financial crisis. You can go back from the Asian crisis to those in Latin America, to United States. However, much of this has changed in the last few years, given the geopolitical fragmentation have been stemmed in its. By panelists, I start with you, Prime Minister.
Nature of international political power configuration and the subsequent economic consequences. The geopolitical fragmentation has been intensifying over the years. No one, however, will deny that the world has benefited greatly from the post-war period when the U.S. remained as the only major dominant power of the world. Multilateralism and globalization were the hallmark of the world at the time. The United Nations, World Trade Organization, and international financial institutions born of Bretton Woods post-war development and prosperity. However, the weakness of the post-war international framework have begun to appear on the scene. In this case, China's rise has been particularly notable. By 2010, China became the second largest economy in the world after the United States. By 2025, it is predicted that Chinese economy is to overcome U.S. economy. The geopolitical fragmentation is affecting the U.S.-China economic relationship for several months in the past. However, there are also people who express their concern on the current state of affairs. For example, about a week or so ago, Janet Yellen, U.S. Secretary of Treasury, expressed the view that economy is rising and we should work harder to cooperate together in protecting countries from this decoupling. Thank you.
Thank you. The same question to President Rousseff. From Brazil to China, you've had a unique...
A partir da crise, problemas que se seguiram. As cadeias globais de valor, outro pilar da globalização, antes da crise cresciam uma taxa mais rápida do que os outros componentes do PIB. Mas com a crise se desaceleraram. Esse recuo foi seguido de uma rápida recuperação em 2010 e 2011, e desde então, Com exceção de 2017, as cadeias globais de valor cresceram uma taxa menor do que o crescimento do PIB global. Isso comprometeu a própria globalização, mas é claro que a Covid-19, os conflitos geopolíticos e as sanções acentuaram e muito a redução do crescimento das cadeias globais de valor, fragmentando a rede e transferindo a expansão para mercados regionais que passam a ter importância estratégica. No mais importante mercado de commodities, na Arábia Saudita, energia alternativa ao dólar. Já o recente bloqueio de reservas gerou incerteza e criou desconfianças contra a proteção dos ativos financeiros em dólar. Essas forças tanto produzem a desglobalização como promovem uma tendência contraditória de um novo tipo de reglobalização. As visíveis falhas de coordenação internacional geraram uma maior fragmentação. As Nações Unidas não conseguiram fazer frente ao crescimento das tensões geopolíticas, nem tampouco as chamadas instituições de Bretton Woods se mostram capazes de reverter o movimento de fragmentação geoeconômica. A economia mundial atravessa hoje um momento de muita incerteza, frente aos efeitos da alta da inflação e das políticas monetárias que acarretam o recrudescimento das taxas de juros, produzindo quebras de banco, alavancagem excessiva, elevando o risco de recessão nos países desenvolvidos, intensificando a volatilidade dos mercados de crédito, moedas e capitais. O fim do quantitative easing e a adoção do quantitative tightening está produzindo, em especial nos Estados Unidos, uma forte pressão sobre o sistema de bancos, iniciado com o SVB e agora recaindo sobre o First Republic. Se resulta isso ou não numa crise de crédito é algo para ser visto. Os países em desenvolvimento em geral sofrem as consequências dessas políticas, sendo meros sujeitos passivos das crises internacionais. Me refiro, sobretudo, aos países do sul global. No entanto, a grande ameaça que recai sobre o padrão vigente de desglobalização é a tentativa de conter de tarifas, expressas no Make America Great Again, seja o Chips and Science Act, que visa o bloqueio da cadeia produtiva de semicondutores da China, ambos aprofundam as fissuras no padrão da globalização até então vigente e produzem a busca por um novo aumento da torta. Uma novidade perversa está no surgimento de significativa concentração de renda e de riqueza dentro dos países desenvolvidos, já que nos países em desenvolvimento a pobreza, a miséria e a fome têm sido uma tragédia presente. Há 500 milhões de pessoas pela China. O primário da dimensão neoliberal financeira concentrou no topo da pirâmide os imensos recursos gerados pela dimensão comercial, industrial, tecnológica, educacional e de serviços, produzindo um padrão econômico, social e ambiental insustentável de desenvolvimento, tanto no sul como no norte. Precisamos de uma nova correlação de forças, multilateral e multipolar, que substitua a posição entre um mundo novo, que ainda não surgiu inteiramente, e um mundo velho, que ainda não morreu inteiramente.
Harold, from the eyes of a historian, this is their history. What went wrong?
Well, thank you, Siddharth. It's wonderful to be here, a great honor, and this is a tremendous initiative, so thank you so much. We've got two slogans on the board, great difficulties at the moment. Globalization, I don't believe that, for instance, if you think even of the China-US relationship, that trade has been expanding over the last couple of years, been rising. So there are, I think, some countries that might be on the fringe of this globalization. I don't think there's much globalization in Cuba. I think Russia is actively trying to deglobalize, but I don't believe that other countries are. Multilateralism, on the other hand, really exists, and we've had that discussed, I think, in the course of this afternoon, that the WTO is stalling, that the Bretton Woods institutions have a really is thinking back on a long historical picture, and that's what Siddharth asked me to think about. So I look at previous moments and when this went wrong. When it went wrong, I think is, as President Rousseff said, with the global financial shortages, supply chain issues. So the episode of hunger in Europe, and Europe then came to the sense that it couldn't solve that hunger crisis on its own. It needed to trade with the rest of the world. It needed to get food from elsewhere. I obviously don't remember that, but I remember the 1970s. I grew up in the 1970s, went to the university in the 1970s. And that was also a moment of big supply shortages. And people at first thought that they should better turn inwards in order to deal with the supply shortages. And then by the end of the 1970s, there was a very different insight that it was actually opening up that did it. And above all, I think the big leader in this regard was in China in 1979 with Deng Xiaoping. So previous episodes of shortage, response to the pandemic in particular, medical technology, communications technology, IT, AI, we're seeing really, really transformative developments, and all of those are going to tie the world together. And I think if you think about this, that you can think of a world that's speaking to each other in many, many different ways. I think in which we have one world, but many systems, and that might be a good way of thinking about how globalization should develop.
Thank you. Mr. Leon, no small economy, and especially an island economy, can withstand the winds. And so from your perspective, as you look back, was there a radical shift?
That globalization is not at risk. If anything, if we contrast with the era of the Cold War, the world was not as integrated or interdependent as today. I've seen research by numerous firms that actually no continent can be self-sufficient by itself. So this is something, but what is at risk is really an existing power who has been dominating the world for the last several decades, with only 4% of the population, but enjoying more than 25% of various kinds of resources, is seen a threat by an emerging power happening. And there's a book by a famous author on the so-called Thucydides trap, that the existing power usually would rival with the emerging power. And unfortunately, out of the 16 times of happening, 12, and hopefully the leaders of the world would have such foresight. And also not even count, there are still people kind of very much underdeveloped in some parts of the world, the weather issues, and then obviously that we discuss in our pre-meeting rooms, now the challenge of generative AI. We need kind of somehow active dialogue to see how we can prevent some of the bad things from happening. As far as Hong Kong is concerned, now Hong Kong, I kind of take the professor's notion that the world is going to be one country, many systems. Obviously, here are one world, many systems. In Hong Kong, we are one country, two systems. But I see the world as mainly going to be one in the Western system and the rest of the world, in a way, with China leading the way. Hong Kong sits right in the middle. We have, as our nation, China, an emerging economy. And we were trading with the rest of the world. Hong Kong is the most open economy in the world, ranked by the World Economic Forum for about 2 decades. So clearly we feel the winds, but hopefully Hong Kong can also play the role in bridging the two systems. Meaning, as I said in the very beginning, the world is very much interdependent. And most countries in the world would still want to trade with China. A lot of investors want to invest in China. China has, through our president, has reconfirmed many times again that we want to maintain a high quality opening up. We want to trade with the rest of the world. We want to maintain the multilateral arrangements of today. So hopefully Hong Kong can play the role in, one, explaining to the rest of the world what China's emergence is like, and secondly, we are no threat to the rest of the world. Also, we would like to invest, or we would like investors and traders to come to Hong Kong to take a look that Hong Kong is still surviving, trade with China, have a dialogue with China, maybe through Hong Kong. So we see the changes, but we hope that consequence of yet another Thucydides trap.
Thank you. Maybe we take a steer from Harold and focus on multilateralism and leave globalization aside for the moment and try and look ahead. We've sort of looked behind and try and look ahead. And there are two statements here. One is a fact and one is a view. The first is, for the next 75 years, the bulk of global growth will come from the global south. Any projection you look at from the IMF to other agencies, that's clearly there. The second is a view that for the foreseeable future, strategic competition will dominate. If these two are true, what kind of multilateralism can coexist with strategic competition, and what kind of choices the global south would need to make or would need to avoid to make this possible? Prime Minister Han.
Can I just comment
on
the first question?
Yeah.
You missed me out. I'm not sure if
I'm sorry.
If you intended. Just briefly, of the things that have been already said, I won't repeat. But I don't believe that they could have been avoided. As has been made clear in the period of 4 decades that we're really reviewing, the world population doubled, and China's economic growth during that period, if you take 2015 price figures, it multiplied by 32 times, to $32 trillion from $2.7 trillion. These are mega trends of undeniable consequence. One of the things that I do think has been missed, and it's a challenge going forward, is whether or not the global media and also strategic media outlets of institutions and organisation and the financial rights of the megatrend where people have a lack of knowledge and respond. And so coming to this strategic question, where we've got caught with a sudden, well actually a very progressive China rising, and it's not only a question of China and the US, many of our economies now are connected to both. If you look at the major 20 economies of the world, both of them are trading massively with the US and China. Small economies like New Zealand, from where I came from, and it was also true halfway through that phase of development, many economies thought they could survive by insular and protected behaviour. And in fact, much of what changed in the periods of the late 80s and 90s was a realisation that you couldn't survive. All you did was ran up massive debts, you got disconnected, and in fact the cost of living through protectionism impacted on your own people. Like China, New Zealand, many of the economies and most of the continents went through a reform period of opening up. In my opinion, it wasn't only China's opening up, although that was a huge factor. There was a huge reform appetite to move away from protection, to give people the benefits of buying and selling or purchasing and receiving goods on the open market that became critical. What we have now is this realisation that we now have 2 huge mega groups competing and many aligned, historically aligned economies now interconnected. Historically, alliances were alliances and could be relied on to remain separate. In my opinion, the changes of the last 40 years have complicated this in the areas of foreign policy, trade policy, and defence. And while we could spend a lot of time arguing where people should spend their money, in my opinion, it's perfectly natural, for example, that a huge emerging economy will invest in securing its interests. Every economy over 4 centuries has done that. We shouldn't be surprised. But what we mustn't encourage is militarisation, to create tensions that then lead to what have historically been other catastrophic disasters. So we're poised in this moment. I don't think we should attempt to look back, but I do think we should learn the lessons of history and also at this moment understand how quickly change can accelerate. My colleague's reference to AI, I think, is going to dramatically alter the framework further. Many economies reliant on the services sector, in my opinion, are very much more likely to be more heavily impacted by advanced AI techniques than production. Now, whether that pans out to be true or not is yet to be seen. But while we're discussing a former megatrend that has got us to this point, experience of the successful, but actually unleashing the potential of those who have historically been isolated. And the question of whether the financial sector, the geopolitical sector, and the multilateral trade system can be agile enough to move quickly to be able to be part of this transformation, or whether it will relegate itself to history simply because it didn't have the wit to do so. I've been worried for many years about multilateralism's ability to migrate. We're in a pivotal moment as to whether the institutions will fall forward and succeed, or indeed some, if not all, will fall back. I don't think all will fail, but it's a fascinating moment that we live in.
So maybe just build on that a little bit. It is true that what you said, that the process of globalization led to more responsible policymaking around the world. Institutions strengthened, markets strengthened, everything strengthened and maybe connected to the second question, and I'll come to AI at the end because it's a topic that's worth a few days of discussion. But if we look forward, what kind of multilateralism can succeed, and what is the responsibility of the Global South to make it succeed? And I start with you, Dame Shipley.
Goodness me. Well, most of the world's humanity lives in what we call the Global South. I think it's 85% or thereabouts of our people. And what we've learned in the last 40 years is if people are connected to markets and markets to people, people's lives improve. China is probably the most magnificent example that you could find, but many economies connected to China have had that benefit as Belt and Road and other initiatives had flowed through. And there are examples in other parts of the world, but it's extremely obvious here that this South opportunity exists. What needs to change? Well, can I make a somewhat political statement? I think that the North-South issue has a rather patronizing narrative, which needs to change. I mean, I don't know why. Well, I do know why historically Australia and New Zealand are not rated as part of the South. And actually, it's the convenient developed economies thrive, and the developing economies who we often historically have been comfortable, and I'm summarizing here, but it's been an aid model, not an investment and emancipation model, that has often evolved in those two conversations. Now, the question of whether or not we're at a pivotal moment in history where these massive populations have the capacity to be connected. Again, I don't want to dwell on AI, but historical banking systems and financing systems and capital flows, for example, have always relied on the information and the rating agencies and others who have had their own historic procedures of deciding what risk looks like. I think that digitalization digital transformation and then digitalization, which connects capacity, has got a lot of opportunity to rip out cost and time. And again, while I'm an ex-politician, I observe that every economy that's been able to focus on productivity gains, in other words, doing more with less or more with the same, have been those who have been in the transformational space. And those who have not been able to put themselves in that mindset and skill set and forward projection are trying to defend their history rather than unlock in a meaningful way the humanity, which has huge capacity. So I, for one, for example, would love to see the Sustainable Development Goals have a digital and digitalisation strategy laid over them as a development and economic emancipation tool when we're talking about North-South. I mean, why should they be locked into the historic frameworks that have allowed finance and so on? We need a circuit breaker. We need to get ourselves to a pivotal moment. And whether or not the technology environment is going to allow us to do that, or whether the institutions need to have an epiphany and be prepared to let go what has been a dominance, but a narrative that protects the dominance, as opposed to a narrative that genuinely is committed to expand the global economy and the experience of individuals. I won't go further into the complexity of cybersecurity and data. We will have to find institutions who can lead in this field, and as a female leader, I've always been very interested in the ESG idea of non-financial measurement. I think it should be ESDG. We should put digital firmly in this, because it's not just a measurement question, it's a value and ethical question, and it needs to be addressed early or we'll be suffering the consequences. So I'm optimistic, but it's complicated, and there will need to be some mindset and some pivoting in order for the South to succeed. Hong Kong, by the way, is in a perfect position. It's history with the North. It's facing within the South, like New Zealand, not necessarily counted as part of the South, but technically, geographically in the South. It has a huge capacity to lead in some of these complex fields.
Thank you. President Rousseff, you've been in the thick of this for the last few decades, leading the Global South forward. What will this new architecture be in terms of multilateralism, and what is the roles and responsibilities of the North and the South?
Eu acredito que o que permitiu o surgimento do multilateralismo foi a quebra no mundo unipolar. A emergência da China cria a real possibilidade de haver uma nova correlação de forças que permita que haja uma outra articulação entre as economias do Sul global. E aí é importante destacar que nós temos de criar outras instituições multilaterais ou reformar as existentes. Na crise de 2008 e 2009, o G20, nas suas reuniões, sistematicamente propôs uma reforma das instituições financeiras. Por outro lado, o sistema ONU, nós todos temos de saber, ele está em crise. A incapacidade de arbitragem do sistema ONU é perceptível. E isso fica claro, e vou dar um exemplo do Sul global, um exemplo lá da América Latina. Durante 40 anos, a Assembleia Geral da ONU votou contra a sanção a uma pequena ilha chamada Cuba. E, nos últimos 40 anos, essa sanção é mantida. Ora, para se falar em multilateralismo, tem de se ter instituições. E aí há uma questão que fica clara. 40 anos aplicando políticas neoliberais que preconizam o fim do Estado levaram a duas coisas. O desmonte de todas as estruturas de saúde pública e, ao mesmo tempo, o mundo se mostrou incapaz, apesar de alguns países, como a China, terem tido iniciativas, no sentido de reforçar a Organização Mundial de Saúde, provendo a Organização Mundial de Saúde de um papel resolutivo e preventivo. Sem dúvida, nós precisamos de uma alternativa multilateral e multipolar ao padrão existente que reduz a distância entre o Norte e o Sul. Nós estamos falando aqui de distância, de uma imensa distância de riqueza e renda. Inclusive, essa estrutura tem de ter maior poder arbitral, tanto do ponto de vista econômico, quanto do ponto de vista geopolítico. Para as economias emergentes, trata-se de superar a condição de meros provedores de commodities. O Sul global deve buscar uma reindustrialização com novas características. Muitos dos países do Sul global não alcançaram nem mesmo a terceira revolução industrial e tecnológica. E agora, diante da quarta revolução, estão ameaçados de se tornarem meros consumidores de produtos do capitalismo de plataforma, apenas utilizando os aplicativos digitais em suas economias. É fundamental, na promoção dessa nova ordem multipolar mais equilibrada, que plataformas como a Belt and Road Initiatives, o Banco dos BRICS, o Banco Africano de Desenvolvimento, o Banco Asiático de Investimento em Infraestrutura e a Corporação Andina de Fomento assumam esse papel fundamental que é de tentar mudar essa correlação de forças que é tão perversa. Nós temos, o Sul Global tem de participar de alguma forma dos processos industriais robotizados, dominar a medicina à distância, criar cidades inteligentes, desenvolver as energias renováveis e fazer pleno uso da inteligência artificial, colocando-os a serviço das pessoas e da promoção do meio ambiente. Na verdade, nós temos que modernizar, mas fazendo que a nossa modernização seja centrada na população excluída do Sul Global, ou seja, voltada e centrada nela. Não há modernização possível que não reduza a miséria e a pobreza, que não eleve o nível educacional e que não garanta ao Sul Global acesso à tecnologia e inovação. O sistema atual possui uma baixa capacidade para levar em conta os interesses dos países em desenvolvimento. O Fundo Monetário Internacional e o Banco Mundial, no Fundo Monetário Internacional e no Banco Mundial, prevalece que tem acarretado a adoção de alternativa do Sul Global está na busca de uma modernização centrada nas pessoas, superando a pobreza, promovendo uma integral e profunda inclusão social, uma modernização que produza... Eu reitero aqui a importância de se construir uma nova correlação de forças, porque não se muda sem essa nova correlação de forças. E ela vem surgindo, e ela está surgindo tanto baseada na iniciativa das pessoas, em processos de aprendizagem, no compartilhamento de informações, mas também ela tem de estar sustentada por iniciativas concretas de reforma e de melhoria dessas relações que implicam na criação de um mundo mais cooperativo. E aí eu considero que essa nova correlação de forças ela tem de estar centrada na construção de alguns consensos. E um dos consensos principais do presidente Xi Jinping, que é a construção de uma comunidade de futuro compartilhado por toda a humanidade.
As I understand it, the question here is, can multilateralism coexist with the strategic competition? Until recently was the symbol of multilateralism and globalization. In the field of trade economy, World Trade Organization also played a very important role in furthering the benefit of free trade. Unfortunately, and the WHO, World Trade Organization has not been functioning for several years by now. Frankly speaking, the cruciality of China in promoting multilateralism has increased tremendously after Russia invaded Ukraine. Unlike the period soon after the World War II, when the United Nations was as India, Indonesia, economic powers of the world in due course, today they together account for 43% of the global population, and theirs is growing at a faster rate than that of developed countries. This means that there will have to be a shake of the international organizations, particularly the United Nations, in due course, giving more responsibility and influence to these countries of South. The first and second industrial revolution in the 18th and 19th century. The consequence of this century, we have to make certain that this kind of history should not repeat again. Now China is on par with the state in digital technology and industry. India is the main supplier of digital manpower globally, as well as the base for digital products. And I'm sure that soon South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia will be on the same course. I think, therefore, narrowing the digital divide between the two camps that developed countries making global south to keep up and make multilateralism alive in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. You steered us in this direction. So what is your take on that?
Well, thanks. Indeed. First of all, a word on strategic competition, because I think that's one of the key difficulties that we're living with. Believe that there are good as well as bad sides to strategic competition. So, in particular, we're living in a world where technology is advancing very, very quickly. We need a lot of investment in new technologies. And one of the things that the strategic competition is doing is pushing exactly that increase in new technology and new investment. If you want a historical parallel to that, think of the Cold War. I mean, obviously, we don't want to get back to the Cold War, and the Cold War was in many ways a frightening and terrible experience. But the moment that the Soviet Union put Sputnik into the atmosphere, and it started to circulate around the world, people in the United States woke up and they thought they had to do more, and there was an immense investment program that actually, in the course of the last couple IRA, took to the challenges that the United States really got stuck. Experts, international institutions, economists were always thinking, if you wanted to push the world away from carbon energy, away from the dependence on carbon energy, you needed to have some kind of financial incentive, some kind of carbon. Didn't want to sign up to any of them. But what this investment program is doing in carbon-free technology, you will increase the amount of non-carbon energy being produced and decrease the price. And that's an instance where the price does what it always should do. It gives a signal. And you will find people then shifting all over the world, and the technology will be available. So in that sense, it's something that opens up to the global south as well. You will find that there will be a move to much more non-carbon energy use without the need of the multilateral institutions. And so I think it's a nice way in which technology can offer a way round an impasse in which we've got ourselves. And just one brief reflection also on what multilateralism can or should do in terms of thinking about the challenges of the future. Security is really important. And security, I think, in many ways, actually, the United Nations, and people have been worried about the United Nations, and some of the comments have been skeptical about what the UN has been doing. But if you think of the way that the General Assembly has responded to Russia's attack on Ukraine, it's an impressive demonstration of a world consensus. It's not a question of the world being split. Very, very few countries voted against the resolution condemning Russia's attack on Ukraine. So there's something good about the UN system. There's something good about the General Assembly. And if you think of then of multilateralism, where we're going to work on this, I think one of the challenges is, and it's been raised several times on the platform before, is about the management of data and the linking of different types of data. That is really one of the challenges that multilateral institutions will face, and where I think there is a case for a really urgent response. Coordinating this data on security, data on health, data on energy, data on the climate, data on financial services. We need to link all of those because those issues are really interconnected, and that I think is the challenge.
So, Mr. Leung, maybe to connect what Harold said in the first part of the role of strategic state industrial policy, with what you said in your first intervention, that there will likely be two spheres. If we put them together, what kind of multilateralism will prevail or can prevail?
Well, first of all, I agree with Prime Minister that it may be difficult to avoid these large power conflict. As I said, history shows that it has been very difficult to avoid, because the existing power would not just roll over and play dead. But I think we must insist that, number one, despite the conflicts between governments, particularly these two powers, we must insist that the people should talk to each other and connect. Because if people are not talking, then it's bad. Secondly, we must embrace multilateralism because the world is one world and we need to resolve all kinds of issues together. And on this one, connecting with what Professor has said, we have to make full use of technology. I mean, to a certain extent, our governance, our management of the world is not really making good use of technology, or if anything, we are actually falling way behind. I mean, with internet, with the TikToks of the world, people are very much connected, and yet we are using a government structure that is not very much sometimes representing the people. They may represent kind of interest groups. So we have to think about how do we use technology. So at least there are two areas that maybe we can think about. One is somehow use technology to connect the various interest groups of the world together. So we express the opinion directly rather than through kind of elected officials. And to that extent, say, for example, IFF, together with the more enlightened think tanks around the world, we should have alliance so that we can express the view of the more informed and intelligent people to tell the world, including the governments, what we are thinking, what we should be doing around the world. And obviously, we should strengthen the existing multilateral organizations, the UNs, the WTO, WHO. I mean, some nations are not paying the dues for some years already. If they are not happy, let's listen to their voice, try to get them in. But on the other hand, we should also think about the other side, because some countries are weaponizing a lot of things, weaponizing trade, weaponizing investments, technology transfers, and that kind of thing. We should also think about even in the financial sector, now that we are in the International Finance Forum. What if a certain country decides to weaponize, say, the SWIFT? With technology, we should quickly get the South and the North together to build something around blockchains. Because with blockchain, then you avoid the weaponization of the SWIFT. I mean, I'm kind of advisor to a company that use blockchain technology to facilitate trade payments around the world, particularly with the South. So we should really empower this kind of thing. I mean, this company, Nian, I think, is doing something that we should be thinking about. So we should use technology to facilitate communication, to promote better governance, to avoid the current system's weaknesses, as well as to prevent the bad things that if some country would decide to ruin the existing system, what we should be doing to prevent the bad things from happening.
Thank you. So just I am the clock. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. My weakness is managing time. But my strength is knowing what my weakness is. So I'm going to skip over the third question and go to the audience and take questions from the audience. May I request you to identify yourself before you ask the question, and a short, pointed question, not a comment.
No questions.
Right at the back.
Thank you, Stuart James from Goldman Sachs. A number of you have, when thinking about what needs to change to fix the situation we're in, have pointed to reform of the current international institutions. But from your standpoints, what does that reform look like to make these institutions both legitimate and performing as usefully as they can?
So maybe President Rousseff, to you, because you're in the midst of this.
Uma das questões que eu acredito que foram mais importantes na década de 2010 foi que após a crise de 2008 e 2009, houve um reconhecimento que o G7 não representava o conjunto dos países e a emergência de algumas economias bastante significativas como, por exemplo, no caso, né, o Brasil, a Indonésia, a própria China, que teve uma presença muito grande. Então, o que aconteceu? Foi criado o G20. O G20, ele tinha, fundamentalmente, um papel, controle sobre a qualidade de especulação descontrolado e que essas instituições tinham de ser profundamente reformadas. Em todas as reuniões que eu presenciei ao longo do pós-crise de 2008 e 2009 e depois na crise do euro, toda a questão era como evitar que essas crises se repetissem. Para que isso acontecesse, era necessário que as reformas pretendidas e discutidas fossem implementadas. Como isso não é algo que é absolutamente tranquilo, envolve interesses, envolve uma visão determinada e um propósito determinado, os bancos continuam sofrendo os mesmos problemas ou alguns em menor dimensão. Então, eu acredito profundamente que é necessário que nós entendamos que o multilateralismo é uma construção, ele não está dado, nem tampouco existe uma benéfica e virtuosa competição. Nos períodos de tranquilidade, você tem uma adoção de práticas que eram até... Eu quero também destacar uma questão séria do Acordo de Paris. O Acordo de Paris definiu algo que era difícil de ser obtido, porque não se conseguia, nas conferências do clima, principalmente eu estou me referindo à conferência em Copenhague, não se conseguia um consenso. No Acordo de Clima de Paris, nós construímos um consenso entre as nações desenvolvidas e as nações em desenvolvimento, em dois sentidos, na adoção de energias renováveis e em assumir compromissos, cada país assumir determinados compromissos. E qual era o enforcement disso? O enforcement disso era o consenso existente sobre a necessidade de redução do clima. Pois muito bem, nós vamos olhar qual é a consequência hoje das sanções no mercado de energia. A consequência das sanções no mercado de energia é uma volta tanto da produção de petróleo como da produção do pior, do carvão. Então, vai se ver, se nós olharmos a distribuição das fontes de energia, nós vamos ver que 30% hoje é petróleo, no segundo lugar vem carvão e depois nós temos gás e energias renováveis, inclusive hídrica. Ora, para que se tenha instituições multilaterais, por isso é que eu comecei falando sobre a questão da arbitragem do poder da ONU. Tem de ter um órgão que arbitre em relação a conflitos geopolíticos e geoeconômicos. Não é possível supor que a adoção tecnológica seja uma trilha tranquila quando nós vemos que há, de fato, uma tentativa de bloqueio de semicondutores de 3, 4, 5 nanômetros dos Estados Unidos à China. Vai ter uma fissura na questão tecnológica. Então, ou nós temos uma noção que há que construir com a vontade dos homens e das mulheres de bem deste mundo. Construir o quê? Instituições multipolares e multilaterais. Tem de ser multipolar. O mundo não pode ser unipolar. Ele é muito diversificado para ser multipolar. Isso implica, inclusive, quando nós falamos em moedas locais, nós estamos falando também neste fenômeno, que é um fenômeno fundamental. Trocas em moedas locais, porque o que sustenta a moeda local não é a sua vontade, é a existência de possibilidade de mercados regionais onde as trocas se dão. Então, isso é importante porque, por exemplo, no caso de países como o Brasil, diminui a exposição cambial, o risco de dívida sistemático que existe no Brasil. Troca em moeda local significa isso. Você vai substituir completamente o dólar? De maneira alguma, não se trata disso. Se trata de combinar diferentes moedas e de construir uma arquitetura em que você possa conviver em condições de permitir que todos se desenvolvam, porque não é tranquilo o acesso à tecnologia. Eu estou muito preocupada com esta questão, porque caso os países do sul global não tenham acesso à quarta revolução industrial, e isso implica por deficiência educacional, pelo fato que de uma parte não chegou nem a terceira, nós vamos ser consumidores, nós vamos ser apenas consumidores de aplicativos. E isso é inadmissível. Isso significa uma ruptura no mercado de trabalho inadmissível. Cria um abismo entre o Sul e o Norte global. E isso não é estável no mundo. O mundo não fica estável como um país também não fica estável com grandes divergências de renda e de riqueza. Então, da mesma forma, o mundo é algo que eu acho que tem de ser criado. E eu vou repetir, acho que a questão da competição estratégica, ela é absolutamente determinada por conflitos geopolíticos e por condições de crises econômicas.
Okay, one more question from the audience, and then we'll move towards closing the panel. It was an impossible topic, points to the clarity of the panel. Maybe we go down 1 minute of reflection, final reflection on what you've heard and the way forward.
Thanks God.
Aaron.
So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in a panel like this, we look back and we think of big mistakes. And I think part of the mistake after 2008 was not really doing enough in terms of reform of multilateral institutions. Part of the mistake after the COVID crisis was the way in which the vaccine issue was handled and the vaccine nationalism, and that, I think, discredited a lot of the vision of multilateralism. So we've got to think of ways of really learning from those lessons and thinking in particular about the way in mounting really management of a very, very complicated system of challenges.
President Rousseff, any final thoughts?
Eu acredito na ação entre os povos e acredito que nós seremos capazes de construir um mundo multilateral, mas que é processo.
Well, I just want to thank you, our group, but also the audiences, as well as Hong Kong Monetary Important Forum today. And we hope that IFF will have a very special relationship with Hong Kong Monetary Authority in the future. And we are delighted that you hosted this. I hope they will be able to reciprocate your hospitality by inviting you to our meeting in Nansha in due course. Thank you.
Dame Shapley, final thoughts.
Look, we can still succeed with a multilateral approach. I think we agreed that globalization, while people are anxious, it hasn't been thwarted. We need to remember that multilateralism, where they are global institutions, it's still a matter of leadership. I was encouraged this week, for example, with the new appointment of the incoming lead on the World Bank. You know, a gentleman, Mr. Banga, a US Indian background, already doing what he described as a listening tour of Africa. And we also need to remember that multilateralism doesn't have to have everyone agreed in every issue. The UN runs a model where unless everyone is agreed, nothing is agreed. But there are many examples of innovation around multilateralism where small groups of countries, some small and some large, have decided to act together. And in my own experience as a small nation, we were the origin of the TPP of all this, and it can bring countries from standards. They can join and collaborate. So I think that the leadership follow amount of momentum. So it's not so much reform as leadership and innovation and flexibility and agility that I think will keep multilateralism alive. Last point, we have to decouple it not from each other, but separate the core foreign policy from trade in some of our global discussions. Otherwise, we get bogged down. And the APEC model is a very good example where everyone agrees not to discuss geopolitical strategic competition, but rather acknowledge that that exists. And by the way, when they competition in-house because they are, Russia and the US are in the room, along with economies like New Zealand and some of the Pacific Islands. We can discuss things like climate, where you've got people all with a common interest, but with entirely different scale in those types of models. And I would encourage people, if they're in a mode for reform, to look at groupings like the APEC model, flexible, adaptable model, which doesn't get us immediately into trouble, but can be highly progressive.
Thank you. In Hong Kong, and so the final word is to you, Mr. Leung. Not to summarize what we've heard, but final few words on closing the panel.
Well, I hope that everybody in this room, but everybody in the world, particularly the leaders of the great nations, would remember that this world is the only one that we have. And human history is actually not that long. I hope that all the leaders, including everybody in the room, when they think about what we do, what they do, think about one world, and then we have a shared destiny. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I hand it to Casey, a warm welcome, a warm thank you to the panel.
Thank you, Siddharth, and thank you all the speakers. Can I invite? Thank you. Let's take a short break. Coffee and tea will be served outside. We will start the next session in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Achieving net zero emissions by mid-century requires urgent action now.
A transition to the new climate economy is critical to avoid widespread economic and financial disruption.
南沙位于珠江出海口虎门水道西岸，曾翻开中国近代历史上悲壮的一页。此刻，作为粤港澳大湾区世界级城市群的一部分，100年一沙，绽放出一朵未来之花。国际金融论坛 IFF 永久会址，一朵木棉花见证世界之约。
一档慢点，
横立岛间，中国首个国际金融岛，未来全球金融资源配置平台，用7.2平方公里诠释无限可能。
往南1公分。
用大跨度异形超线钢结构打造的木棉，为了一朵花的轻盈开放，建设者使命如山。
我们这个钢结构来说，有超过10万片的这个构件拼起来的，基本上就没有一片是一样的。整个的用钢量接近5万吨。
张美飞带领一支平均年龄不超过30岁的年轻队伍。2003年国际金融论坛成立时，大部分建设者们都还是少年。此刻，他们将用10万件规格不同的钢结构，完成高空极限拼接，以盛开的花瓣呼应青春。
安全组立马进场，立马进场！
现在风速4级。
整体的航架的话是165吨，整体长度的话是99米长。我们就通过32根钢丝绳和临时的一个槽钢进行一个加固，旋转进去之后，这样子会很危险。它这里头装了18个应力片，监测所有的这个应力的这个状况。
这是钢结构木棉花花瓣连接处的重要节点，也是会场迎接世界的大门。若干小型钢结构在地面拼接出整体造型，确保花瓣轮廓流线最自然的姿态。
钢丝绳反拉，前面反撑，对，还是偏心。专家到哪里了？还等呢。
完成重达165吨的异形结构提升，重力的稍许偏心都将导致支撑台架受力不平衡，必须随时将偏移力校正为垂直上下的重力。
我就是说，通过这个角点来把它提升。
现在这个力你没有地方消除掉。
那个台架脱了之后，这个钢绳如果还往这边偏，那我们还要进行调整吗？是吧？
调整还要偏的话，就要重新算这个结构了。为了达到这种理论状态，我要形成这种状态。但是我这里还有个力啊，我这手上这个力在外侧能不能加一个顶杆？
工程师现场把脉，利姆模型的精密计算，如同 CT 透视扫描。
焦点没有问题吧？
现在算出来只有116兆帕。
一啊，提升比较平稳。对，实际上1.05就够了。设备组就位没有？
报告指挥，1号点位观察员已到位，安全组已经到位，
开始提升。
像它这个舞狮，它也会搭台子、搭凳子，就相当于我们搞建筑打基础是一样的。狮子嘛，代表这个朝气蓬勃嘛，我觉得就是一种好的精气神。
这一个行架，这个提升完了以后，我们这个木棉花的这个造型呢，就基本呈现在大家眼前了。我们来的时候呢，有一些沼泽地啊、鱼塘啊，一片荒地。木棉花还有一个名字叫英雄花，代表的一种阳光。
日月流转花的心思，天地见证花的容颜。花开在此刻，致敬光阴，诗意的行间。
心跳。
achieving net zero emissions by mid-century requires urgent action now.
A transition to the new climate economy is critical to avoid widespread economic and financial disruption.
Hello, hello, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the second session of today's conference under the theme Prospects and Roles of Asia, Hong Kong, and the Greater Bay Area. Let's welcome our moderator, Dr. Lin Jianhai, IFF Vice President, Director of IFF Global Center, and former Secretary of the IMF. Jianhai.
Thank you very much, Casey. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. So wonderful to see so many old friends, but also meeting a lot of new friends. And by looking at how meeting organizing team move things around, but including by lifting curtains so quickly, efficiently, effectively, you can imagine, right, and how much efforts they have put into organizing such a conference. So therefore, let me first sincerely thank three meeting organizers, IFF, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and also Hong Kong Academy of Finance for their great efforts for hosting this meeting conference. Particularly, I would like to thank the Hong Kong Monetary Authority for providing such a beautiful conference venue. And I cannot imagine if we can find any place which is this beautiful. Probably not. Therefore, we should come here more often. And so this is the session 2. So we'll discuss the prospects for and the role of Asia, Hong Kong, and the Greater Bay Area. In this session 1, we already discussed the broader issues concerning globalization and the geopolitical and economic dimensions of the world economy. So in this session, our topics will be more specific, more focused. Let me just give a few very brief remarks about Asia. So as we all know, Asia has been the major beneficiary of globalization in the past 50 years. And Asia is expected to lead the global economy in the next decades. I don't know whether 50 years or more. Looking back, Asia has grown so much faster than the rest of the world. So here I'd like to give you 5 sets of numbers. In developing Asian economies, that exclude Japan, Australia, real GDP per capita in 1960 was just a little over $300. Today, over $5,000. The share of GDP of these economies in 1960 then was just 4% of the global economy. Today, 25%. 5 years, then, now 72. Average years of schooling at that time was only 3.5, so 3.5 years. Today, 9. And finally, very important number, the extreme poverty rate was about 70% in 1980, not 1960, only 1980. But today, 7%. Without is a very important 0. What are achievements? So the IMF recently projected that Asia will grow 4.6% in 2023, compared with 2.8% globally. And this means that Asia will likely of the global total. So this means that Asia remains a bright spot in this gloomy world economy we're all facing today. Now, looking ahead, all of us in this audience, probably many more beyond our room, would like to know how Asia will fare in this highly uncertain global environment. What are the major challenges facing the Asian economy in the next decade and beyond? And how will geoeconomic fragmentation affect Asia, particularly reflecting Asia's close integration in the world economy? So against this background, our session now will focus on 3 sets of questions. First, how can Asian economies, which rely so heavily on global links, trade, investment, people, technology, adapt to the changing global landscape? So that's about Asia. 2, what is likely to be the future role of Hong Kong as a major international financial center? How can Hong Kong evolve into a knowledge and innovation-based center? What can Hong Kong do to maintain and enhance its competitiveness in today's world? So that's about Hong Kong. 3, what are the strategic priorities of the Greater Bay Area? How should the importance of the Greater Bay Area be developed and enhanced as a financial and digital hub? How can Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area work together to achieve their mutual benefit and also mutual development? So that's about Greater Bay Area, Asia, Hong Kong, and the Bay Area. Now, with this as a background, I'll be so happy to invite Mr. Lai Zhihong to come to stage to give his initial remarks. So Mr. Lai is currently Vice Mayor of Guangzhou Municipal People's Government. So he will come here on the stage to talk about developments in Guangzhou, but also Greater Bay Area for about 8 to 10 minutes. Thank you, Mayor Lai.
尊敬的韩生洙主席、尹伟文总裁、林建海副理事长、各位嘉宾、女士们、朋友们，大家下午好。很高兴出席今天的国际金融论坛香港中心的节目揭牌的活动，并且参与亚洲、香港和大湾区的前景与角色的专题讨论。首先，我代表广州市政府对活动的举办表示热烈的祝贺，也对各位嘉宾、各金融机构长期以来给予广州发展，特别是广州金融工作的关心支持，表示衷心的感谢。根据今天的讨论的这个议题理事长已经说了我这里借这个机会跟大家分享几点思考也供大家讨论。也借这个机会也介绍一下广州的金融的有关的工作特别是南沙的这个接下来的金融的这个工作的这个有关的一些设想。近年来，广州始终把金融工作摆在突出的重要位置，推动金融高质量发展取得明显成效。去年，广州金融业增加值约2600亿元，同比是增长7.2%，金融业税收达到490亿元，占广州的税收比重约8.8%。去年12月末，金融业总资产是突破10万亿元，本外币存款规模首次突破8万亿元，贷款规模接近7万亿元，保险资金投资广州累计余额突破1万亿元。这些数字在大陆来讲呢，以城市作为单元我们还是排得比较前面的。目前全市上市公司达到246家，国家绿色金融改革创新试点、国家气候投融资试点、 国家数字人民币试点、国家金融科技试点，这些呢都是由广州来具体实施，这也是我们这几年创新成果这个一个具体的展现。另外呢，广州的普惠贷款风险补偿机制、政府性融资担保体系和市场化转贷机制等普惠金融的机制政策，有效滴灌中小微这个企业就是小微的市场主体，我们还是非常关注。另外，今年1季度，广州金融业实现开门红，实现金融业增加值是709亿元，增长是8.9%，这个速度我们是高于全国和全省的平均速度，尤其是在传统的6大城市北上广深，另外的天津、重庆这6个大城市当中呢，我们这个增速是排在第1位的本外币的存款和贷款这个也分别达到2位数一个是10.7%，一个是11.8%。总的说来广州金融的综合实力现在是不断的增强的，金融服务实体经济的这个质效也是不断提升的，金融改革创新的动能也在不断的释放，金融业支柱的地位因为作为一个国家中心城市它这个金融业的这个支柱这个地位呢，还是要不断的这个强化。目前广州的金融业已经成为广州市第4大的支柱产业和第5大的税源产业应该说为广州这几年高质量的发展是发挥了非常重要的作用特别是大家知道前3年这个因为疫情影响我们的经济的运行多多少少都会受到一些遏制在金融这一块一直保持比较好的势头。与此同时广州始终把协同港澳、推动共建粤港澳大湾区国际金融枢纽作为推动广州金融高质量发展、高水平开放的关键抓手和重要目标。截止目前，港资银行在广州设立的营业性机构达到34家，在税的港资银行总资产接近1300亿元，累计共有79家广州的企业在香港发行上市，这个数字占广州上市企业大约是30%，应该说对国内的广州的企业对在香港上市还是情有独钟。2019年粤港澳大湾区发展规划纲要提出要打造广州南沙粤港澳全面合作示范区，研究设立粤港澳大湾区国际商业银行，服务大湾区建设发展。从目前看这个我们的这个进展还是非常顺利的这个刚刚一开始李特首这致辞，实际上我们在3月份的时候就有关南沙的有关金融发展的情况也专门跟特首做了这个交流这个特区政府也是非常的这个支持非常的支持。去年港交所参股的广州期货交易所揭牌运营，这个交易所将打造成为立足湾区、服务湾区和一带一路以及服务绿色发展的重要金融基础设施这个也是这个国内所批的第5个交易所大家知道这几年一直没有批交易所去年能够突破性的把广州期货交易所这个顺利开张是标志着广州的这个金融业这个从基础设施建设来讲有了一个重大的这个突破。目前呢，这个广州期货交易所已经成功上市首个品种工业硅，它这个期货和期权同时上，同时也是我国首个新能源金属期货的产品今年我们还会推出更多的一些品种在 在这个交易所啊进行这个期货交易所交易。去年呢，国务院在6月6号啊也印发了广州南沙深化面向世界的粤港澳全面合作总体方案，赋予广州南沙深化粤港澳全面合作，打造成为立足湾区、协同港澳面向世界的重大战略性平台的重要使命，并把有序推进金融市场互联互通作为重要的任务。建设粤港澳大湾区跨境理财和资管中心啊，已经作为重大的事项列入了南沙方案。省市都有一个实施的啊这个意见和实施的方案，列进了省市的近期的工作的重点。粤港澳大湾区保险服务中心的设立也在积极的推动啊，这些我们也跟这个于总裁啊也的这个同事也有保持密切的啊这个沟通。另外呢，这个 FT 账户以及跨境的理财通、QFLP 和 QDLP 等试点呢，也在积极的推进，而且有了一些成效，为大湾区跨境资本的流通，应该说这个实现了啊这个双向的高速路。此外，2017年国际金融论坛，就是我们今天啊这个主办方之一的 IFF 啊，永久会址已经落户广州南沙啊，我们看的那个短片，已经连续举办了6届高规格的年会，开展了高水平的对话啊。今天这个金融的大咖云集啊，而且非常有国际范。这个今天我们这个 IFF 的香港中心揭牌啊，也是穗港两地深化金融合作的生动体现，将进一步凝聚啊穗港两地金融机构和金融人才的力量，为构建粤港澳大湾区国际金融枢纽会注入更强的动力。展望未来，我们对深化大湾区，特别是穗港的金融合作，充分发挥大湾区国际金融枢纽的作用，为实现中国式现代化提供更强更有力的金融支撑呢，我们是充满信心的。刚刚过去的1个月啊，这个就是上个月啊，习近平主席啊，到广东、广州视察，在视察的时候呢，也特别指出啊，粤港澳大湾区在全国新发展格局中具有重要的战略地位，要使粤港澳大湾区成为新发展格局的战略支点、高质量发展的示范地和中国式现代化的引领地，啊，给了很高的这个期望啊。同时也要求啊，广州要积极参与粤港澳大湾区的建设，继续在高质量发展方面发挥领头羊和火车头的作用，啊，这个也是这个给广州啊，有这样的一个历史的这个机遇和历史的使命。当前，广州全市上下正在深入学习贯彻习近平主席视察广东重要讲话、重要指示精神，锚定高质量发展的目标，把推进粤港澳大湾区建设摆在更加重要的位置，全力推动超大城市发展方式的转变，着力构建现代化产业体系，聚力加快南沙的开放，致力打造国际一流的营商环境，不断拉开高质量发展的新格局，进一步增强高质量的新动能，激发高质量的新活力，塑造高质量的新优势。我们相信啊，粤港澳大湾区雄厚的产业基础、蓬勃的创新活力和高质量发展、高水平开放带来的广阔前景，将是粤港澳大湾区金融业发展最坚实的基础和最有力的保障。接下来，广州将深入贯彻落实习近平主席关于金融工作的重要论述精神，坚持金融服务实体经济的宗旨，坚定深化金融改革创新，坚守金融风险的防控底线，着力推动 金融高质量发展，支持香港强化国际金融中心的地位，携手共建粤港澳大湾区国际金融的枢纽。也借这个机会，我们希望在下面这几个方面作为重点领域，与香港深化大湾区的金融合作第一个呢是支持重点平台发展建设特别刚刚提到的，希望支持广州期货交易所的建设发展，打造国际一流的期货交易所携手推进设立粤港澳大湾区国际商业银行和大湾区保险服务中心，共同推进广州南沙建设发展，推动南沙金融高水平开放，这是第一个。第二呢是要希望呢有序的推动金融市场的互联互通所以今天我们这个于总裁在这里，我们是特别高兴因为他是这个几个重要的金融的监管职能集于一身，是吧？这个非常有条件去推动这个相关的这个工作我们也期待这个于总裁到广州南沙去考察我们也会推荐更多的一些合作的一些领域和事项，强化大湾区金融领域的规则衔接推进 QDLP 和 QFLP 等跨境金融业务的试点，支持建设大湾区跨境理财和资管中心的建设，深化大湾区绿色与可持续金融的合作，推动绿色金融标准的研究和互认互鉴，推动建设粤港澳大湾区的这个碳市场，服务大湾区绿色低碳和可持续发展这一块的这个绿色金融刚刚李特首在介绍的时候也特别提到实际上广州的绿色金融一直走在全国的前列我们的包括这个绿色的这个债券包括这些碳排放的交易都是在全国来讲都是数一数二的。另外呢，我们还会深化数字金融和金融科技领域的这个合作，强化金融对大湾区先进制造业、科技创新和数字经济的支持作用，提高金融监管的这个数字化水平，更好的服务大湾区的这个创新发展这是第二个。第三呢，这个希望是强化金融交流的合作，我们将依托香港科技大学广州实际上就是这个我在活动之前也跟我们于总裁介绍这个去年我们是有2个学校在南沙这个开学，一个呢就香港科技大学广州，还一个呢就是明星港人子弟学校开业。我们会依托这些这个平台鼓励开展金融科技、金融人才等培训的项目，加强复合型和高层次金融人才的保障因为我们特别羡慕就是香港的金融人才特别多国际化程度特别强。接下来我们要更好的发挥国际金融论坛就是我们 IFF 和香港亚洲金融论坛、广州金交会等金融高端论坛展会的这个作用，打造大湾区高端金融人才交流平台，增强大湾区金融国际传播力和国际影响力最后呢，中心期待这个我们的香港金融管理部门和金融机构一如既往的支持广州金融的发展和开放合作，也期待我们各位嘉宾这个为大湾区的金融发展提出更多更好的这个意见建议这个也祝本次的这个活动取得圆满成功，祝在座的各位嘉宾工作顺利，身体健康，谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Mayor Lai, for your really informative and substantive remarks regarding the recent developments in the financial sector in Guangzhou and the Greater Bay Area, and also the prospects for further progress in the years ahead. You also have outlined 3 priorities for further progress, further developments, and further cooperation between Guangzhou, Greater Bay Area, and also Hong Kong. Very exciting. So with that, again, thank you very much. So can I now invite our panel speakers to come on the stage? Our panel speakers, yeah, please, Eddie, yes, and Nicholas. Thank you very much to the panel. And so you can see that people move things around very quickly, very nicely. So let me introduce very briefly our great panel here. So to my left is Li Tong. Li Tong is the IFF board member, CEO, and executive president, Bank of China International. Then next is Eddie. Eddie, I don't think Eddie needs any introduction. So he's the chief executive of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. And next is Professor Song Ming. Professor Song is the IFF academic committee member, and he's also the dean of the IFF Institute. And then Nicholas Tissot, right? Nicholas Tissot is the chief financial officer of CLP Holdings. So great panel. Now, given the time constraint, if you don't mind, I'll basically move right into our 3 questions. Question number 1, given this strategic competition environment or global geo-economic and political fragmentation environment, so how can Asia adapt to this environment? What can Asia do, right, to maintain its competitiveness in the years and the decades ahead? So that's about Asia. Okay, with that, Tong, let me turn to you first, followed by Eddie and Song Ming and also Nicholas.
Okay, thank
Tong,
you.
please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Very honored to be invited by IFF again. This is my, if I remember correctly, it's my 4th IFF. So 2 times in Guangzhou, 1 in Beijing. And this one is the first time in Hong Kong. So very delighted to see IFF can be held here. I noticed that many friends from mainland. So if I may, I would address in Chinese. Okay. Back to 回到您的问题上，就是关于亚洲。关于亚洲这个问题呢，因为我们一直在这个市场里边哈，我们看到亚洲呢，实际上在这个国际经济环境里边呢，还是有一些挑战。这个挑战呢，大概有3个方面。一方面的挑战呢，是我们看到哈，这个近期呢，金融市场呢相对来说比较动荡，也就是短期来看，发达经济体呢，就是它的货币金融条件是收紧的，目前还在比较紧的状态。我们看这个收紧，这已经是持续了1年多的时间了。那么这个的话呢，就是也看到持续收紧导致了一些金融里边发生一些动荡啊，一些银行出现一些问题啊。那么确实部分发达国家呢，经济的前景呢是转弱的。那么这个跟我们亚洲是什么关系呢？咱们知道啊，发达经济体呢，它是国际上就是应该讲的需求终端的这个主要来源地，也是呢国际上投资资金的主要来源地。 所以呢，它的转弱的话呢，对我们亚洲呢一定是有负面的影响，这是第一方面的挑战。另外一个呢，我听到几个应该讲的几位嘉宾讲到了，就是逆全球化。逆全球化这已经不是一个新发生的事情了。逆全球化呀，还有就是供应链，有的是有的是叫什么叫在岸化，还有的叫近岸这个外包啊，这最近都是比较热的词儿。那么这个的话呢，确实这个对我们亚洲呢也是有一定影响，因为我们亚洲呢是全球供应链里边的一个重要的组成部分，所以这个呢也会受到影响。那么第三个呢，就是说呢，就是关于绿色。绿色实际上应该讲呢，绿色发展是全球呢能达成的很好的共识。那么我们看到呢，发达国家呢也是在努力的去探索像绿色贸易投资规则这个规则的建立。这个规则的建立的话呢，我们就想哈，我们希望啊，将来不要形成绿色的投资的壁垒，就是对我们亚洲国家来说，因为毕竟我们亚洲国家呢，很多国家还是处于一个在能源消耗比较大的一个发展的周期内，所以呢，在这个时候呢，就说我们希望不要对我们有这样的一个不利的这个贸易壁垒，我们这个还待观察。所以这个对我们来说呢是挑战是存在的。当然，说绿色发展这个也是肯定是有机遇。好就好在呢，咱们亚洲呢是确实经济呢发展的相当之稳健。我们也看了一些数据哈，就说，这个亚洲呢，我这个数据我还真得是跟大家分享一下。我们看了 IMF 给的数据哈，是2022年啊，他们把我们亚洲的增速这个从3.8呢是提升到了这个23年的这个4.6，就对我们的预判呢是蛮高的。明显的是高于全球平均的2.8的增速。那么发达经济体呢，咱们又看一下这个数据呢是1.3%左右。所以呢，就是亚洲这边呢，咱们看哈，从这个看还是我们全球经济增长的这个最重要的引擎。如果从区域的角度来说，我们大概在全球经济增长的贡献呢会占到70%。所以这个呢是我们亚洲，说我们确实有个庞大的经济规模，比较稳健，这个呢确实很好。再有呢，咱们也看到近10年来，亚洲这边的话呢，也是逐渐的出现了一些多边的这种呢这个合作机制，这个呢逐渐建立起来。比如说“一带一路”，比如说 RCEP， 这我们都已经加入了哈。还有呢，其他的像 CPTPP 啊，还有 DEPA， 当然 DEPA 呢就是一个数字的一个伙伴关系的这个，规模相对比较小，但未来呢它是一个大的趋势。这个都是在咱们亚洲呢都是逐步的建立起来的这些机制。我是觉得这个呢是非常好的，为下一步呢亚洲在区域内的融合发展呢，我是觉得还是奠定了一个很好的机制的基础。这个呢，我们也看到了像，举个例子哈，就是其实呢，去年应该讲呢，对有些地区来说哈，疫情还没有结束，但是呢，去年呢，其实已经表现出来了一定的那个韧性，比如中国跟东盟之间的那个贸易啊，是增长了15%，这是2022年，所以就说咱们区域内的这些经济的这个体量和活力呢，应该讲呢，还是有比较好的条件。那么未来呢，就是我们怎么样更好的去应对，未来的这个世界的不确定性，增强我们的发展韧性。我觉得从第一点来说呀，刚才我听哪位 speaker 讲的，就是我们是对，刚才林先生也讲到了这个话，就说呢，我们是全球化最大的受益人。那么我们这边的话呢，也就是说未来，我觉得作为我们亚洲来说，还是高举开放旗帜，开放再开放。作为我们来说呢，还坚定不移地走开放的道路，因为我们，如果不去捍卫这个全球化的成果，那谁去捍卫呢？所以呢，这个呢是我们坚定的要做这件事的。而且呢，作为我们亚洲跟发达经济体之间，我觉得也是加强对话、加强交流。就像我们这 IFF 就是承担了一个非常好的这么一个使命，促进对话和交流，促进理解，增强互信。那么我们跟发达经济体之间的经贸方面的这种联动呢，也应该是要加强，因为越加强的话，实际是改善双边的这个互信的关系，而且呢，增强这个经济的融合度。实际上，这个呢是最实际的一个举措，是抵御逆全球化。所以这个呢，我是觉得第一点呢，就是还是要开放。那么还有呢，就是充分利用我们区内呢已经 建立起来的一些多边的合作机制。那么进一步呢加强我们区域内的经贸合作。我们看到，像中国呢已经加入了一些这个机制哈，而且我们倡导了"一带一路"，应该讲的正好是10周年，确实是还有相当了不起的成就啊。那么我们看到呢，就是说呢，中国呢，在就是2023年，咱们经过了大疫3年，这个经济增长的韧性呢迅速恢复。那么今年呢，我看到全球的一些主要的机构呢对中国的一个预判。有的呢可能说我们就是将近5，有的呢比较多的呢说我们5以上。那么我们现在看的话呢，就是中国经济在5以上呢，意味着什么？意味着我们对全球经济的这个增长的贡献呢，我们会在1/3左右。那好了，中国呢是亚洲最大的国家，那么也就意味着什么呢？中国的能够高速的增长的话，意味着跟中国经贸关系紧密的这些经济体，他们的经济呢一定也是获得比较好的提升。所以呢，这个就是说咱们区域内的合作呀，应该讲呢是非常的现实的一个选择。那么还有呢，就是说咱们亚洲呢，这边我们也是希望哈，就是说在科创投入方面，就我们看这些年应该讲进步的非常大，就科创投入方面还可以进一步的加大这个就是加强投入。还有呢，在教育方面也可以加强投入，紧紧拥抱这个数字发展的这么一个大趋势。包括呢，就是现在我看像第一批 A 啊，也是提出来数字经济的这个伙伴关系的那个建立，我觉得都是非常好的一个举措。那么这个呢，都有利于什么呢？实际上是能够提升我们亚洲国家的我们的这个应该讲经济里边的那个产业链的附加值。所以呢，这个呢，我是觉得这几个举措呢是要采取的。谢谢。
Thank you so much, Tong. You are so clear, outlining 3 challenges globally, and 2 strong points for Asia, and then 3 solutions to address the global challenges and also challenge facing Asia. Great, thank you so much. Eddie,
All right.
I turn to you.
Well, I'll first say a word about globalization, and then I'll talk about how the Asian economies, what they can do in the face of this trend. Well, as both of you mentioned, globalization has been benefiting Asia a lot in the last few decades. But we should know that it's not only Asia that's benefiting from it. If you think about global economy in the last 10, 20 years, the great moderation, as people call it, a large part of that is actually attributed to globalization. That pushed down the cost, where you can have low inflation but strong growth. So if you take globalization away, it's a lose-lose situation. It's not really just hurting the developing economies or Asian economies. It's actually hurting back the developed economies. So it's not like globalization benefits only Asian economies. If you look at the World Economic Outlook that's just put out by the IMF, they have quite an interesting study that says if you pull in a hypothetical scenario where there is long-term fragmentation between the 2 blocks in terms of FDI flows, the output loss globally amounts to 2% of the global GDP in the long term. And that's a lot if you think about 2% of global GDP. But that's not only the only loss that's incurring. Think about it. Deglobalization, or any talks of it, is actually very inflationary. At a time when the global central banks are fighting inflation, growth, financial stability, it's actually adding on their burden. It will become almost impossible for them to do their job. One good news about these talks about deglobalization is that it's actually, I think Professor James said it for a while. You actually don't see it in the numbers yet. If you look at the FDI flows or the China-US trade flows, it's not showing in the numbers yet. I think there are several reasons for that. One is that economies of scale in itself is good. Second, it's much easier to think about relocation of supply chains in simple industries like textile. But if you think about more complex industries like automobiles, electronic goods, moving the supply chain completely or even part of that is actually extremely hard. So there's actually a lot more tax than what's happening in reality. And to me, financial decoupling or financial deglobalization is almost impossible. The whole global financial system is so interconnected that you can't just say, hey, that's the Asian FX market and that's the non-Asian FX market. It's impossible. But one less good news about the globalization discussion is that, one, it will still be around us in the next few years, at least the next few years. And secondly, you will see certain relocation, nearshoring, friendshoring of strategic sectors, that's for sure. Whether you're talking about semiconductors, AI, or technology sectors, whether it's the industry themselves or even the financing of it, FDI or loans, it will be affected. And also you might see certain changes in the shape of globalization, in that you might see more regional supply chains emerging, producing in the region for the region. That might actually come in time. So we are all facing with this environment in the next few years. So what should we collectively do in Asia? I think there are three things. One is that be resilient, because all this geopolitical fragmentation at times might cause very volatile capital flows, very volatile financial market changes, that we just have to make sure that our own financial system has the ability to withstand it. What you can do is basically three things. Keep your buffers very ample in terms of, for example, foreign reserve, in terms of the buffers in the banking system. If you look around Asia, what's happening in US and Europe has not got any spill over to Asia at all. The main reason is that we keep our house in order. The regulatory system is strong, capital buffer is strong, liquidity is strong. So keeping your house in order, be resilient, is important. And the second thing that we should do collectively is be strong. You have to build your house. You have to invest in infrastructure, in talent. And by infrastructure, it's not really just the physical infrastructure. I think there's a lot of talks in the last panel about digitalization. Here, we should be building a lot more digital infrastructure, which is quite lacking in Asia. And we should also build more talents in the higher value add areas like AI, like cloud computing, like advanced manufacturing. It's not really just basic manufacturing. And the third thing that we need to do is to build more friends, get more friends. And this is what Li Tong talked about. The intra-regional, intra-Asian trade and investment has been increasing. But what we are seeing, that one area that is progressing less fast is the intra-Asian service trade. There are still a lot of barriers for service trade. Especially in future, I would imagine that there will be a lot of service trade through digital means. And if we can lower the barriers for that, if we can come up with some sort of digital standard for Asia, that will actually facilitate the intra-Asian flows. Apart from Asia, we should be talking about Middle East, even Latin America, Africa. So we should diversify our trading partners network. So I think these are what we should do: be resilient, be strong, and build your network.
Thank you very much, Eddie. So clear, so clear. Actually, your comments echo Tong's comments so well, right? She outlined the challenges, and you also provide solutions. And you also emphasize losing globalization is a lose-lose situation. So excellent. Thank you so much. Professor Song.
All right. Yeah. Okay. First of all, Asian is big. There's so many countries. So talking about this generally, it's kind of difficult. But I can talk this in terms of general way. First, I agree that globalization is not dead. I don't believe in this deglobalization. There may be some slowbalization due to this strategic competition between U.S. and China, and also the recent pandemic. But globalization, the trend is still there. It's maybe slowing down because globalization has its logic, not just politically, but also market-driven, free market economy. That's a basic fundamental logic behind globalization. I think it's still there. And the second logic for that is this technology. With this internet, with this advancement in AI and etc. So this basic logic is for globalization. I can't imagine that the global economy is segmented into 2 or 3 parts with such advancement in our
information technology. It's not, it's hard to imagine that happening. So that's my first point. The second point is Asia does benefit from globalization, I totally agree. But as any country, like China, US also benefit from globalization. But why there's such anti-globalization thinking, getting so popular now? So we need to think very carefully what are possible side effects of globalization to our Asian economies. We all know that globalization benefits the whole country, but does not benefit different classes of people equally. So that's income equality issue. That's very important. And also for environment issues, as China's experience during this globalization, we benefit greatly from globalization, but we also suffered in terms of environment quality and etc. So those are the issues Asian economies need to address, given that globalization is really good for all of us, but we need to take this benefit and somehow share that more equally among people within the economies. So with that, we can continue to have this globalization. I think that's very important. I don't see that being discussed in today's session. And the third point I want to make in this issue is Asian economies need to think about the long-term strategic policies, rather than focus on short-term pressures. So there's, because of this competition between US and China, there's a great pressure for Asian economies to take a side. This is very wrong. If you take a side, this is definitely not beneficial for Asian economies in terms of long term. As I mentioned, globalization will be with us, and even China and the US may not necessarily get into a hot war. Okay, it will be a serious conflict, for sure, but not necessarily will get into, some people believe that will be a very, very serious conflict. So if you know the future, then you should think in terms of that long-term strategy. China's rise is inevitable, even with containment. It may slow down, but it's inevitable. And China's market is the biggest, one of the biggest. It will be the biggest market in the world. China's technology even is getting more advanced. So Asian economies should collaborate, not just with Chinese producers, just look at the Chinese market, but also Chinese technology. We look at the data. For example, China has a biggest trading relationship with Southeast Asia countries. But in terms of technology relationship, it's not there. China still has a very close relationship with US and South Korea and Japan in terms of technology, the patents and etc. But with those other Asian economies, it's relatively lacking there. So I think that's a great opportunity for those countries to strengthen its technology relationship with China. So overall, I do believe there's still a lot of opportunities for Asian economies, given our belief in the long term. Globalizing is still with us.
Thank you so much, Ming. And you described three things: globalization still alive. Secondly, all countries have benefit from globalization, though the gains from it have not been shared equally, and which we should address. Thirdly, still a lot of opportunities for further cooperation among Asian economies. Thank you so much. Now let me turn to Nicholas. Nicholas, please.
Thank you, thank you, Lin. Speaking last, I will try not to repeat all the ideas developed by my colleagues. Thank you, IFF, for hosting us and discussing these important topics. I think my first point was already well made, including by Lin in his introduction, which is that this part of the world, and I say that as an outsider, this part of the world has clearly strongly benefited from globalization. So participating to globalization was a very good story for that part of the world. And I remember just as an anecdote, so not quoting a lot of numbers as you did in your introduction. When I first arrived in Hong Kong back in the late 80s, I was attracted because I felt that this part of the world had the potential to participate, to enter into globalization and benefit from it, and I wanted to see that with my own eyes. And that was the very beginning of the opening of southern China. You had these cities which were the initial program of opening of Chinese economy, and we see that we are really further down the road, and we've had the introduction on what Guangdong is doing, and it's quite impressive when you think of where we were 40 years ago. So I would like to express that yes, globalization is alive and kicking, and it's certainly still part of the future of that part of the world, and it's still an opportunity, a further opportunity for this part of the world. And I think we are also in a region, and we have in China long-term vision, and I think it's really important that we sort of harness globalization in a positive way. But I'm quite optimistic that with the long-term vision in this part of the world, and it's not always the case in other parts of the world, maybe why this part of the world has done very well with globalization. I think careful planning is going to be important, and I will not dwell on what the Chinese government has announced in terms of vision and way forward, but that's clearly part of building a new era of globalization, or new cycle of globalization. And globalization, when you think about it, was a very long-term trend. What is called first globalization happened in the 19th century, and then there was different cycles. And I think we are, I'm an optimistic, and I want to be today cautiously optimistic about the next round of globalization. And I think what I would like to mention in terms of the challenges we will be facing are basically two things. The first one is clearly overcoming the geopolitical tensions. That's a challenge to globalization. That's a challenge to peace. That's a challenge to the development of our economies. And certainly, economies are already very intertwined, including the heart of the current tensions, meaning the US and China are actually, when you think about it, very intertwined. So we should leverage what the business is doing to help geopolitics be managed in a positive way. And we know that we are in a world with currently even hot wars in Ukraine. So tension does exist, but I think we all have a responsibility in managing this tension, because it can kill the economy, it can kill the next round of globalization. The second challenge I would like to mention is that the new globalization is not going to be a deglobalization. I agree with the other speakers. It's going to be a sustainable globalization. So I think we realize that some parts of globalization didn't make sense in terms of sustainability. And as an energy company, we are clearly acutely aware of that. We need to move to building a globalization that's going to be actually sustainable. So we certainly need to be more selective on what we do with globalization. For example, importing or exporting goods at the other end of the world in a totally nonsensible way. So we need to be more selective. But I think we are in the process of creating a new world, more sustainable, cleaner, and which will allow to continue globalization in a sustainable way. I'm thinking of things as straightforward as transportation, for example. When we will have hydrogen flights, when we will have boats which will no longer emit CO2 based on new technology, we will be able to continue to help the world benefit from the optimization brought by globalization. So I'm reasonably, yes, optimistic on how we will be able to master these challenges, overcome these challenges, and move forward to a new cycle of prosperity for the world.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. So let's move on to the second set of questions. Casey, the good thing of having conferences in this room is that we don't have a clock. So I'm losing track of the timing. But I might need to borrow a few minutes, with your permission and Eddie's permission, from the dinner time. Might borrow a few minutes to stay in this discussion. So let's move on to the second set of questions about Hong Kong. So basically, questions are, what is the likely future of Hong Kong as a major international financial center? And how can we make Hong Kong a knowledge-based, innovation-based center? What can be done? Eddie, please.
Well, let me start with the role of Hong Kong as an international financial center in the future. I think you can well predict what I would say. Of course, Hong Kong's role will be even more important in the future. Several areas. One is our traditional intermediary role. I think it will be deepened. Hong Kong will continue to be the most important gateway between China and the world. And as I said, I don't see financial decoupling happening. And I do see continued fund flows, capital flows between China and the world. And when you think about the global investors, in fact, I talked to most of them, they remain extremely interested in Chinese assets. Why? One, China's GDP is now 18% of the global GDP. And the holdings that they have on Chinese assets is more like 3-4%. There's still a long way to go for them to really match the two. And secondly, Chinese assets has almost zero correlation to the traditional assets. So if you are an asset manager, you will know the importance of diversification. So those flows will definitely continue to go in to Chinese capital markets. And if you look at where those flows come into China now, about 2/3 of the stock and bond flows actually comes through Hong Kong, through the stock and bond connects. So that trend will continue. But I think the more important trend in the next few years will be the capital coming out from China. It is beginning. If you look at the Wealth Management Connect, it's two-way. And it's the first time that individual wealth is allowed to come out to buy global wealth products. Where will that happen? It will be through Hong Kong. And same for Bond Connect southbound. It's the first time that institutional investors on the mainland can use their capital to buy global bonds. Again, it's through Hong Kong. So I think the two-way flows will only strengthen in the future, and Hong Kong's traditional intermediary role will only strengthen. There are also two new roles for Hong Kong as well. One is we've always got that second role, which is RMB offshore, the biggest RMB offshore center. But that role, that market will continue to grow, in my belief, quite significantly in the coming years. Because, well, if you look at the use of RMB in the international trade and investment, currently, China's external trade, only about 18% is done in RMB. That's way below any other countries like Europe, US, or even Japan. So the wider use of RMB in trade and probably in investment will almost be a certain trend. We need to build the infrastructure, etc. But with that wider use of RMB, you've got to have a place where you can provide RMB liquidity, or where the counterparts, trade counterparts of China, after they receive the RMB, they have a place to invest. And that place will be Hong Kong. Two reasons. One is that there could be a preference to invest to the offshore market when there is a perception that there's free flow of capital, there's common law here, people feel a lot more at ease to invest in Hong Kong. And secondly, if you internationalize any currency, there's a price to pay, which is the impact on the capital accounts. If you want to keep the capital accounts partly closed, then you can rely on Hong Kong as the firewall. So I think that role will gradually grow in the next few years. And the third role will be our role in being the Asian voice in the latest financial trends in the world, including technology and ESG. And we need to do that because otherwise, Hong Kong will be more like an Asian financial center or even China's financial center and not a global financial center. We need to be at the forefront of these global trends. And that's one reason why we spend so much effort in developing projects in, for example, central bank digital currency. There's a project, a cross-border payment project using CBDC involving Hong Kong, China, UAE, and Thailand, which is the most progressive CBDC project in the world, not just in Asia. So that's where we want to position Hong Kong. Same for ESG. We talk a lot about the importance of environment, but the main places in Asia that needs transition is China and India. And I would imagine that a lot of these transition financing will happen in Hong Kong. And again, that's why we are so intent on developing the green finance, green bond, blended finance market here. So I thought those will be the roles of Hong Kong. And what do we need to do? A lot, of course. One main thing which I think is important is, if you think about an international financial center, it's about the ecosystem and also the opportunities. In fact, if you think about our ecosystem, it has remained unchanged in the last few years. The common law, the talent pool, the regulatory standards, etc. But what's changed is the perceptions of global investors on Hong Kong. So what we need to do is to change that perception by hosting conferences like this, by telling the Hong Kong story overseas. Of course, we need to upgrade our platforms as well. So the government efforts in creating better frameworks for family office, for virtual assets is very much welcome, and that's important. And we also need to work, again, like I said, on global issues like technology, like ESG, not just on our own, but probably together with the Great Bay Area. And that's something that I think we can further discuss later.
Thank you so much, Eddie. So important, so informative description of what is going on in Hong Kong and what needs to be done, where Hong Kong heading to. Thank you so much. Tong, let's turn to the financial market. How, say, from the financial market perspective, you see the role of Hong Kong as a major international financial center?
我们第一个话题呢讲了全球化，那么延伸到这里呢，我仍然想讲呢，香港在全球化里边呢，它是什么一个作用？我们之前讲的全球化呢，应该讲主要是经贸的全球化。我认为香港呢，未来呢，一定是就是推动经济金融全球化的主要的关键的动力。那么这个会体现在几个方面，因为呢，首先就说呢，香港呢一直都是中国和世界之间的桥梁。那么我想呢，无论在过去、现在还是未来，香港都是一定仍然是这个桥梁，而且是更加重要的桥梁，这个是一定的。那么就是在我们看啊，从零几年刚那个时候开始探索的，从那个 QDII 啊，一直后来到通股票通、债券通、ETF 通，到后边呢还有各种通哈。未来我觉得还有非常大的一个互联互通的扩容的空间。那么这个通的话呢，实际上呢，应该讲呢，就是使得内地和海外全都受益。那么从香港这一端来说呢，我们的受益就是说呢，我们的资金池、资产池是得到了大大的丰富。应该香港的资本市场，咱们从这个咱们说这个90年代末的时候，跟现在对比，都是一个非常大的一个差异。而且现在这个随着通哈，应该各种产品呢，实际上也是丰富了咱们这个内地啊，包括咱们大湾区啊，应该讲的都是得到了。而且我们是什么呢？就是从内地呢来的发行人比较多，那么我们这些产品呢，实际上呢，我们把它也是这个分销给了全球的投资者，使全球的投资者实际上分享了到了那个咱们亚洲的经济的成长，特别是中国的经济成长哈。实际这个通，我觉得未来的作用呢会越来越大。这个桥梁呢是 越来越重要。我是觉得这个。那么在此基础上呢，我们可以呢就是成为一个金融规则上的通，就是以往可能是产品的通、资金的通，未来呢进一步的发展到金融规则的通。我们看到这个香港这边也是推出就是这个港版上市公司啊推出这个 ESG 披露标准。我觉得这个实际上就体现了一个规则的通，因为在规则方面跟国际接轨，就像刚才艾迪说的，我们无论是法治的框架呀，还是就是这些年呢形成的一个接轨的一个这么基础啊，确实是有这个优势。所以呢，香港呢，我觉得在这方面呢，可以把这个作用还可以进一步发挥。还有呢，我觉得香港呢，就是体现为经济金融全球化的呢，还有一个就是香港可以把它定位为我们亚洲区域，甚至说乃至“一带一路”区域的金融支点。这个呢，我是从2月份的时候陪特首去中东呢去考察时候呢，实际我也是路上呢，我就一直在被人问这个问题，就是香港究竟在“一带一路”里边，在这个广泛的国际合作里边发挥什么作用？实际我们呢，我就是想哈，很强烈的声音在心里边啊，就是我们是香港绝对可以做一个金融支点。那有的人可能说怀疑香港能不能有这个作用？那我举几个例子。那么就说呢，“一带一路”区域产生了一个全球最大的一个 IPO， 那么这个中标的呢是唯一的一个中国的这个公司的中标啊，是来自香港。这个是人类历史上有史以来最大的一个融资的这么一个项目。那还有在“一带一路”上呢，为“一带一路”提供了很多的债券的融资支持，包括呢很多伊斯兰债，应该讲呢包括了绿债，发行了很多都是香港的机构来发行的。那么还有中国跟欧洲之间有史以来最大的跨境的并购项目，是一个科技企业哈，这并购项目，这个呢也是由香港的金融企业来完成的。那我们说这个全球最大的这个金属交易所，它呢应该讲也是咱们香港联交所旗下。咱们就说，实际上我们在这个金融这服务啊，应该讲呢这个能力，我说金融支点，我想大家可能不会怀疑。所以我想呢，这个呢是我们香港可以发挥的作用。第3个作用呢，就是国际金融的创新中心。那么创新方面呢，这几年，特别是2018年以来，就是香港推出了很多金融方面的改革创新。你比如说同股不同权的制度，比如说生物科技的融资。那么由于这些呢改革创新呢，实现了什么呢？2022年的时候，香港成为了亚洲最大的生物科技的融资中心。所以这个呢是我觉得是非常有说服力的。那么今年呢又进一步推出了18C 的上市制度。所以最近我听到很多科技企业来找我们呢，跟我们说，我们原来想到哪去上市，现在我们想能不能到香港来，因为你们的18C 我们很感兴趣。也就是说呢，改革创新，我觉得这个呢是非常的有生命力、有吸引力的。那么像这个呢，实际上是促进了什么呢？就是促进了香港呢就科创的发展，因为它支持的不仅仅是香港区外的科创企业去来融资，它也有香港本地的，所以它这个是支持香港的未来的就是咱们的经济结构的转型，就是提升香港经济里边的科技含量。所以呢，金融这个创新呢，应该讲它是特别重要的一个支撑的作用。那么包括呢，去年年底也是成立了一个 Core Climate 这么一个就是碳金融的一个交易的一个市场。所以这个我也是出去在各种场合呀去发言的时候，也是向大家宣传这个。我说我们这个亚洲的企业，特别是呢我们这个大湾区的企业哈，多去加入我们这个交易市场。刚才我也听到赖市长也讲到哈，咱们那个广州的广期所其实在绿色金融方面是被广期所是作为 top priority， 所以呢就是说我们在这方面呢绝对是可以跟香港互动起来，去进行一个粤港的一个金融合作的。所以这些方面呢，我是觉得呢香港的定位呢，我觉得应该是有它很强的优势。那么还有呢，就说呢，就是我们香港未来能不能发展成为一个知识型的一个创新这个经济体？我想我们呢有这么几个方面支撑。第一个，刚才讲的这个金融创新，所以呢使得科技企业啊在这边的融资呢，应该讲呢这个潜力得到大大的释放，吸引力很强。还有呢，我们香港本身呢，其实呢大学的基础、大学教育啊， 也是很强的，在亚洲我想也是这个绝对是首屈一指。那么再加上呢，我们这个我也看到最近政府出台了一系列的措施，吸引国际企业、吸引人才，然后呢推出一系列措施呢，就是推动了科创，推动香港的经济结构转型。我觉得这几样措施，这3样措施结合了起来，所以我觉得香港成为知识型的、创新型的经济体，前景可期。
Thank you. So Tong has really made us feel very excited about Hong Kong. So many roles Hong Kong can play in the future. Probably we need another dedicated session to discuss the role of Hong Kong in the future. Maybe Eddie and maybe Casey, maybe Jizong, we should do it at some point. It's really exciting. So can you two be so brief about Hong Kong? Then we'll move to the third question.
Okay, just very briefly. I totally agree that there's a great potential for Hong Kong to develop further as an IFC. There's new opportunity that, as China is entering into this so-called high quality growth phrase, there will be new financing and investment opportunities. In terms of high quality growth, we have emphasized on opening further to the rest of the world. Given these political tensions, Hong Kong can play more role in helping mainland to further open to the rest of the world. And other high quality growth strategies such as green economy and also this shared economy, etc. In terms of green economy, I totally agree. Hong Kong can play a very important role in developing this green finance. As I know, Guangzhou is also trying to develop that, but Hong Kong is very international, as people just made comments today, and we can attract foreign capital into this region. Perhaps much more easily than domestic centers. So that's something very important for Hong Kong to play. And another opportunity is the digital finance you just mentioned. The world is also entering into this economy that's very, very much dependent on digital technologies. For developed economies, almost over 50% of GDP now contributed by these digital technologies. China is also, it's about 40% of GDP is now dominated by digital industries. So therefore, to serve this digital economy, the further development of digital economy, digital finance is obvious the most appropriate tool for doing that. So we need to move away from some of the traditional ways of doing finance and moving into digital finance. Hong Kong is a particularly good place for doing that because Hong Kong has its strengths in its law and regulations, and it's understandable by the rest of the world. So therefore, we can experiment on regulations and laws on this new development, the digital development. And for example, the Web3 technology and fintech technology, mainland China knows its great potential, but since the economy is so big, so they want to see some test grounds, test results. If it's successful, if the risk is contained, then the whole country can move. So Hong Kong is the best place to test this kind of a new financial innovations, and then later on, can be adapted by the rest of the country. So therefore, I think in the new so-called high quality growth, Hong Kong has much important role to play than before.
Thank you. Nicholas, please, can we be a bit brief?
Yeah, understood that you start to become nervous about the time. I will try to keep my remarks brief. Just saying first that I think maybe a useful reminder to say that Hong Kong is a pretty unique place for being a financial center. I mean, in terms of tax environment, in terms of legal framework, in terms of level of education and availability of talent, in terms of forex also, being with a currency pegged to the pegged to the US dollar and being at the same time the number one renminbi offshore center. So I think there is a very solid ground on which to build, and I've understood from Eddie that there is a plan from HKMA to continue the process. So I will limit my remarks, which are also the remarks from the point of view of an issuer active in the energy sector. So I think I agree with everything that was said around carbon emission, carbon trading, and I think there is room for an articulated carbon trading market here in Hong Kong in combination with the national scheme in the mainland, and I think it's a very important new development. My second remark would be around continuing to encourage fintech initiatives, because I think the finance of tomorrow is not going to be the same finance as the one we've known until now. So we need to think about the future, and then I think also we count on the HKMA plan, but we should be as issuers also innovative with the banks in order to create the sustainable finance framework of tomorrow. And just to illustrate that for CLP, we have started introducing back in 2017 a climate action financing framework, and it's really now a central part of how we raise funding, and we raise funding from investors, whether bond investors or equity investors, from basically every part of the world, all parts of the world, and to attract funding, you really need to move with a different approach. And we were with basically around less than 1/4 of our funding covered by this climate action framework, and last year in 22 we were with 2/3 of our funding covered by this framework. So there is room for progressing those issues and positioning Hong Kong as a major sustainable finance center. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Nicholas. So now let's move to the final set of questions. How about 10 more minutes? I'm already eating into the dinner time, so dinner will be very brief. Yes.
I'd like to ask a question to Eddie. As you may know, the International Finance Forum is now located in Nansha International Island, and it's hoped that they will eventually develop that island as center of the international finance. When it is done, I don't think it will take a long time, but when it's done, would that Nansha financial island a complement to Hong Kong or substitute Hong Kong?
Well, I think there will be complementarity between, for example, Nansha, or for that matter, if you think about Shenzhen or Shanghai, they will be much better in domestic financial intermediation. But when it comes to cross-border flows, if there should be collaboration between Nansha, Shenzhen, or Shanghai with Hong Kong, that will make it so much easier. And everybody will benefit. Think about the Connect schemes. It's really the connection and collaboration between Shanghai and Shenzhen with Hong Kong. And we can think about not just capital markets, but in future, if there should be corporate treasury management schemes, we can actually also think about that kind of connection. So I think it's really complementary.
What specific area do you think Nansha should specialize in the coming years?
Well, I think there are, what immediately springs to mind are two areas. One, of course, is the corporate area, including, of course, the technology firms, plus the supply chains that's linking Hong Kong and Great Bay Area. Basically, Hong Kong, in terms of the value chain, the manufacturing chain, is very integrated between Hong Kong trading firms and the factories and other firms in Great Bay Area. So if there should be a way of linking them up, so that the financing, for example, from Hong Kong can flow from here through the supply chains into Nansha, into the firms, especially the SMEs. I think that will help a lot. That's one area. The second area is, of course, the climate area. I always think that, if you think about the transition financing needs of the whole of China, and if you just zoom in Greater Bay Area, it will be tremendous. And we really hope that Hong Kong can play a role in channeling the global capital into the Greater Bay Area for climate transition. And one way is to make use of the financial markets here. One good precedent example is the fact that the Shenzhen municipal government actually issued 2 tranches of green bonds in Hong Kong. And that sets a very good example for other corporates to follow suit. If they can come to Hong Kong's market, tap the global capital, get the funding into Nansha, and then do it for climate purposes, that would be ideal. And of course, we will very much welcome the Guangzhou municipal government to come to Hong Kong to issue bonds as well. Green bonds, social bonds, I think that will be extremely helpful. So I think it's, at least in these 2 areas, that we can collaborate a lot more.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister Han. You are helping me to go through the third question already. So let me just ask whether there's any final reflections, among the panelists regarding this question. Greater Bay Area development, how Hong Kong and the area working together to further enhance mutual benefit, mutual development. Any further comments? Maybe Song?
Yeah, just briefly, just continuing this question. I think Great Bay Area is one of the most innovative, most competitive, most open economies, regional economies in the world, in China. So in terms of the role of Hong Kong in serving this part of the economy, one thing it's important is that we know Great Bay Area, especially Shenzhen and Guangzhou, very innovative economy. So there are a lot of small enterprises, a lot of new ideas, great ideas. Hong Kong, on the other hand, is more concentrated on service economy and the financial sector. So how these two, kind of combine, how Hong Kong to serve this innovative economy is very important, because that's also, the major idea of high quality growth is innovation-driven economy. So Hong Kong's financial system also need to be innovation-driven financial economy to help that, to match that. Yeah.
Well, maybe I can supplement one point here, which is I fully agree. As I said, Hong Kong is good in the financing part. Great Bay Area is really good in the innovation and technology part. If the firms there can rely on Hong Kong to do the financing, whether it's bond, equity, or bank lending, I think it would be a good fit. But what's also needed for that to happen is the flow of, not just flow of capital, but the flow of data. This is something that we are actually pursuing, starting with credit reference for commercial enterprises. If the banks or the market here do not have the data regarding the firms in the Greater Bay Area, it's extremely hard for them to do any credit decisions. So that flow of data, two-way, will be something that we want to pursue as well.
Thank you so much. Nicholas?
Just one remark to insist on, in my view, the importance of infrastructure as a foundation of future growth and future development of the Greater Bay Area. Whether we talk about energy, that's our business, but same goes for water management or waste management, and obviously interconnection and internet highways. I think investing in a seamless infrastructure in the region is a very important foundation for the future development of the Greater Bay Area, which means we need to articulate investment and coordinate investment between the two sides of the border. And I think that paves the way for a great future for the region.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Tom, please.
我们之前呢，可能讨论的是比较多的，讲了互联互通，就是通。那么，现在呢，我想 briefly 的就讲一下，就融这个字，融合的意思。 就说呢，大湾区这边呢，还是在融合方面呢，还要进行呢机制方面的创新。那么这个创新的话呢，就比如说像这个两地专业人才的资格的互认，这个呢，我是觉得呢可以再推进。那么包括两地的产品的互认，这个呢已经是开始推进几年了。那么还有包括呢，就是为了这个融通啊所做的服务，你比如说跨境的金融纠纷的解决、仲裁，这个呢能不能有这机制呢能够说融合的？还有呢，像就是这个咱们说这边是主要是还是金融的那个联通嘛，因为大湾区主要还是金融的联通。那么金融跨境监管合作这边的话，因为两边还是不同的这个体制，所以这方面能不能说要创新出一个能够融合的一个机制？别的没有，谢谢。
Thank you so much. I think so. I still only have about 6 or 7 questions. Casey, making Casey very nervous. But anyway, I'm already about 10 minutes passing the timeline, and I would prefer or like very much to give the final opportunity to give to Eddie to a few words to wrap up the discussion.
Well, the way I look at globalization is that it's going to continue, especially in the financial area. Decoupling is not going to happen for the global financial system. And the connection between China and the world will continue and strengthen. And Hong Kong will be the place where most of this will happen. So if you've got a chance, invest in Hong Kong, use Hong Kong, expand your institution here. I'm doing advertising, I'm sorry.
Great. Well done, well said. Thank you so much for all the panelists, just great discussion. I wish that we'll have time to continue, but well, let's do it another time. With that, let's wrap up this discussion. Let me invite Mayor Lai to come on the stage. We have a group photo. Please, 赖市长，你请你过来，我们这个合影，对。
Thank you again. Thank you for the panel. Thank you for all these very insightful, in-depth, and constructive discussions. And thank you very much to our audience for taking the time, for your patience. And thank you, our media friends, for coming today. We have a very good event today, and I hope you have a very good weekend. Thank you.